Moving on, attachment B identifies the historical transfers in and out of the school capital construction account from the fiscal year 2005-2006 biennia to the estimated fiscal year 2021-2022 biennia. In 2017, the legislature eliminated a required transfer from the school foundation program account to the school capital construction account. Prior to that, any unencumbered or unexpended balance in excess of $100 million from the school foundation program account was transferred at the end of the year. It is important to note that the most recent LSO fiscal profile estimates that the school capital construction account will have a deficit of approximately $25.85 million. This is due to lower estimated state mineral royalties and will require further augmentations to meet current appropriations from this past session. While the legislature has expanded the revenue sources for school capital construction, there is no permanent mechanism to transfer funds from the school major maintenance sub-account or the state mineral royalties account to the school capital construction account. In the 2020 budget bill, section 300G provided for the state auditor to transfer the funds within these two accounts to the school capital construction account. And section 301B provides interfund borrowing authority to the state treasurer up to $60 million to meet cash flow requirements. Table 1 shows the historic and estimated revenues for the school capital construction account for fiscal year 2015 through 2024. Please note that the state mineral royalties column for fiscal year 2020 and 2024 shows estimated deposits into the school capital construction account and the state mineral royalties account. Additionally, the spending policy amounts for fiscal year 2021 and 2022 are guaranteed through the spending policy, but for fiscal year 2023 and 2024, the amounts are dependent upon the available balances within the SIPA and Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund Reserve account. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Senator Landon, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and really appreciate, Ms. Hogue, your presentation there. Can you help me by going back over the state mineral royalties piece and remind me of the last couple of sessions, because we've had some good debate, some good ideas regarding how we ought to operate with that. Decided not to affect the automatic transfer of those funds down to the state capital construction account. But can you help me remember exactly enough? And can you go over that again, please? Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, of course. So in the 2018 budget session, which in 2018, Wyoming Session Laws, Chapter 134, Section 315, distributed to the common school account within the permanent land fund. So that was that first shift. And then in the 2019 general session, so 2019 Session Laws, Chapter 204, Section 1 and Section 2, this is where the school lands mineral royalties account was created. And that shifted the 1/3 of that state mineral royalties from the school capital construction account to this new school lands mineral royalties account. Last year in the 2020 budget session, House Bill 15, which was sponsored by this select committee, was the discussion on if we should do a permanent transfer from the school mineral royalties account to the school capital construction account. And there was discussion throughout the session, but that inevitably did not pass, which is why in the budget bill, Section 300G and Section 301B are those transfer mechanisms that were implemented to get that money to the school capital construction account.
Senator, I'd also note that that $8 million cap was put in place, we've discovered maybe in the 90s at some point, and we figured it was at that point, 8 million was about what the school or the royalties were generating within the state. And so when we decided to lift that cap, it was because we were generating well over the 8 million. And so that was one of the changes that took place there a couple years ago. Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Leanne, thank you for the information. Just a quick reminder to me, what is our annual obligation here lately for major maintenance? So it seemed like biennium, it was like 120 million. So as I look at this figure coming up, 2021, we're projected to have a total in the school capital construction of 72.5 million. So I'm just wondering what our major maintenance obligation is. Just please remind me. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would have to look into that. Let me see if I can.
Leanne, you can get back to us
Okay.
with that information a little later in the meeting, if that's okay with Representative Summers. Representative Summers, I think you're in the ballpark. It's that 120, 130 million per biennium range, but we'll let Leanne catch up with us on that in a few minutes. Other questions on what Leanne presented here this morning? Representative Harshman. Mr. Speaker, I apologize.
Thank you, Chairman. No, that's, you know, and I just reminder too, and I think most of us have been on this committee for a long time, but good on all you folks, man. We did some good work the last few years, you know, and you think about our three structural deficits we referred to in the general fund, school capital construction, and the school foundation program. We pretty much eliminated this one for the most part. I mean, using some of the at 0.45 SIPA, and then going back to our Constitution, right? The Constitution says a third of state royalties, but then somebody had the idea of putting a cap on that back in 1992. So by blowing that cap off, and you know, I think it works fine. Just having the budget transfer appropriations looks at it every year, and that'll be a classic 300 section in the budget going forward. I think it'll work just fine. So thanks for all your work on that.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman. So Leanne, help me just to understand the structure here. Had we not put the footnote in the budget to allow borrowing from that newly created School Lands Mineral Royalties account, we would have either had to curtail capital construction or found revenue elsewhere to do that, or funds elsewhere to do that. So then my question is that something that we'll have to continue to do moving forward, is make sure that footnote is in there to give us the ability to borrow from that account? And Mr. Chairman, maybe a question back to you. Is that something that you anticipate us making a run at again with some sort of legislation?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that is correct. We'll have to have that provision in the budget bill moving forward, or find another mechanism to get that transferred.
Representative Larson, I think for now we'll probably just do it through the budget bill on an annual basis. We had a bill last year that would have made that an automatic transfer, and there was some heartburn on both sides of the building, and so while it did make it through the House, the Senate slowed things up, and it probably works fine to make that transfer through the budget process. Speaker Harshman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think the key, though, is by setting up that separate account, we now profile it. So that's the key. We're not, and I think that's been the frustration for many of us all along, is that we have a true deficit, but some of our tools are not allowed to be profiled to solve some of the deficit. And I think by going back to the Constitution, allowing that third to sit in its own pot. And it says Constitution, that's what it's for. It's for support of schools. So, but the key now is so Ms. Hoag's talking about a $22 million shortfall over 2 years, $11 million out of this budget. I mean, we can solve that, I think. But it's not $100 million. If you didn't have that account, it would profile this $100 million, and then presto changeo, we'd fix it. And I think people are getting confused. And now this is showing the real math, and it's on the up and up. And I think, it's a good way to do it. So thank you.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, this is kind of a question for you, I guess, as one of our representatives who serves on appropriations. There is a piece of what Leanne was talking about, which I guess, are we more comfortable with the Appropriations Committee having to allow for that borrowing authority every single year, or is that something that our select committee would want to consider going forward, that just simply be placed in statute, that from this point forward, they have that borrowing authority? I'm not sure that that's something we have to lock up in appropriations year by year, but would appreciate your thoughts on that. Or anybody else on appropriations. We have several.
I think it's either or, but I'd certainly, if the committee wanted to try and draft legislation to do that, I'd be fine with that. If the committee feels it's working the way it is, I'd be fine with that. So any other thoughts from members of the committee on the question Senator Landon just asked? Well, we'll keep stewing on that one, Senator Landon. Representative Summers, you asked the question, major maintenance, and it's about $153 million a biennium, 76.5 per year, roughly. And that is 2% of the cost replacement value, as said in statute, that creates that number for major maintenance. Representative Summers, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So just to be clear, Leanne, so when I look at this chart, because basically we are going to generate in the year 2021, we're going to generate just a little less for capital construction than that we actually need for major maintenance. So we won't even cover our major maintenance bill as described there with the amount of money that we have set aside for school capital construction. Is that correct then?
Mr.
Go ahead, Leanne.
Yes, so based on the May 2020 CRIG estimates and the current obligations of this past budget session, that including major maintenance and everything will be at a $25.9 million deficit, approximately.
Representative Summers, you'd remember last year we had a deficit in the account as well, and we made a direct transfer from SIPA outside of the guaranteed amount, and that's how we came up to cover what was needed within the school capital construction overall funding needs for last year. That was done in the budget we just passed here in March. And I would anticipate that going forward, something like that will have to take place again. Go ahead, Representative Summers, follow up.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I guess my point was, one, we have to cover major maintenance. That's something we absolutely have to do. So in my mind, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how much extra do we have to pull for that? Obviously, as we go forward with this budget and revising a budget, we're going to have to think about all of these projects that we do and how we do it. And so I think that's going to be an interesting conversation, but I assume that will be our conversation for the rest of the interim is how do we really handle what kind of recommendations should we make to appropriations on what should be in this next coming budget and what changes should occur to the budget. So that's my I guess if my question back to you, Mr. Chairman, is are we as this committee going to make recommendations back to appropriations on what I guess what should or shouldn't be in that budget?
Representative Summers, I think we'll hear from state construction here after a little bit and see what their proposals are. And then it will be this committee sort of balancing the proposals that are coming from the School Facilities Commission and the funds available as to how we want to move forward. And you're right, we will be discussing that throughout the next several meetings and throughout the day today as well. Representative Larson, you have a question or a comment?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think you're setting the stage really for the rest of the discussion for the rest of the day, because if I understand correctly, as we get into capital construction and we start looking at the requirements of the state, when a facility is identified as needing to be constructed, if there's a new school, we have the responsibility as a state to do it by virtue of the cases that are out there that drive this right now. And so then we're going to be challenged with where do we get the funding to build if that's required. And there will be constant pressure then to come back and snatch up maybe some of the major maintenance dollars to fill any shortfall or whatnot. That's what we've seen historically on all of our state buildings, where our major maintenance falls to the wayside when we don't have revenue sources enough to take care of that. And so I really applaud. I think that this is an important discussion for us to have, because we've proven that when we let major maintenance fall shy, that it ends up costing us more moving forward. But yet we're going to have to figure out then how do we take care of the needs of capital construction as we move forward as well. Am I correct in as you've developed this agenda today? Is that kind of the direction that you're hoping this discussion goes, or am I off in the weeds again?
You're on the right track. We wanted to have a little historical discussion so that it showed where funding came from, how it's been paid for, what it looked like in the past, and what it might look like going forward. As I think all of us recognize the need to do major maintenance so we don't fall behind the 8 ball several years from now and have a major bulge in the snake, if you will, of capital construction needs because we didn't do the major maintenance all along to make sure the schools were kept up and in good shape going on. The new construction, as capacity needs increase and things of that nature, or a building just falls beyond repair, that's going to be a major discussion that I don't know how we'll answer it right now, but we'll continue the discussion and just keep working forward. And so, yeah, that was why we wanted to start today with a little bit of this historical discussion so that people could remember what it looked like in the past. And, you know, if you would go back, it's just off the chart here, go back to 2012, 2013, 2014, those eras, you know, and it was $500 million or more in annual capital construction. And some of it was major maintenance, some of it was new construction, some of it was component level construction, but that budget was far larger than what we're seeing even on the chart that's in front of us here today. And so going forward, it will be slim pickings, but we'll figure out a way to get it done. Senator Landon, I see you had a question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to kind of tag on to what you were explaining to the committee, and many of us on the committee have been around for a while, as the speaker pointed out. But I will say this: we're in a fortunate position in that we have been able to reach back. You might remember last year we reached back and grabbed a couple of projects to suggest to the legislature, which were conditioned projects. And for the most part, the state has caught up a long way on that front. And so that's the good news. The bad news is we do have capacity issues that continue to come to the fore. And that, you know, primarily we're talking about Teton County and down in the Star Valley area. You might remember we're adding on to some schools there and over in Laramie County. So that's kind of where we find ourselves. Is we fortunately, and we can hear from the capital construction guys, Mr. Finney and the crew, but we don't have a lot of condition concerns out there. From this point forward, we are going to have to deal with some capacity issues, no doubt. So we're in as good a position as I think we can be, but obviously we're going to have to try to find some money for capital construction. The second reminder, Mr. Chairman, is that component level funding that you referred to, that's the funding, in my opinion, which takes care of our communities out across the state. A lot of that construction work is done by the guys down on Main Street. And of course, that's the important work that we do to keep these buildings up. So thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Speaker Harshman.
Hey, thank you, Chairman. And members, just on that table that Leanne has prepared for us on table 1, 2, I just wanted to, and I know the chairman, he's on capital finance, and you start seeing in 23 and 24 where it drops off. You see the decrease in the spending policy amount on the, so if you look at table 1, it's under spending policy amount. It's all the zeros, and then of course we change the law, it goes into effect where it's 0.45 of the SIPA. 43 million, it grows to 44, almost 45 million. Then all of a sudden it takes a cut to 41 and then to 37. And the reason is because we're going to reduce those spending policies. It's probably the worst bill I ever allowed to go through the House of Representatives. And I regret that every time I see a chart like this. But anyway, that's going to be reduced. Now you know how I really feel about it. That's going to be reduced to 4.5% in the spending policy. So the SIPA then is going to go from 1.25 down to 1, and 0.45 of 1, of course, is less. And that'll eventually catch back up as the corpus grows, but we've done a lot of work to try to fill up the reserve account so we can actually just allow the process to work and tip those funds. But we'll make another run at that in capital finance, hopefully, and we can get it through the committee. But just so you're aware of that. And then finally, I would say, if Senator Bebot was here, he was here in the 90s, you know, and when we eliminated major maintenance statewide, we paid for it. I mean, we paid billions for it. And one thing you'll hear him, I was on a teleconference with him just a couple days ago, so I won't speak for him, but he's adamant about not repeating that mistake. And the thing about major maintenance too is, and you said it, Senator Landon, that's capital construction. Those are all Wyoming license plates doing the work at your school, you know, and so it's so important. I think all of us just keep reminding ourselves as we move into the 66th legislature, keep reminding folks going forward, boy, that penny wise, pound foolish. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to follow up on what the speaker was saying and emphasize the importance of it as well. This has been, I think, this select committee's mantra for a lot of years is that the investment in this major maintenance pays dividends in the long run, but we've typically tried to save in the short run, which has cost us. And even now, we're still shorting major maintenance. We know that we are underfunding major maintenance despite everything we've said, because we still don't have the money to fully fund it where we know it needs to be. And I think it's important that message not die, because at some point we need to remedy that when we have the funds available. We know this is probably not that time.
And that's a great point, Senator Rothfuss. We've seen the reports in the past meetings that say we should be 2.5% to 2.7% of CRV, which would significantly increase that 153 million to a much larger number than that. And so we've kept it. And 3 years ago, we even ran a bill to move that up to 2.5%, and it was unsuccessful. but we've been able to maintain the 2%. And I think everyone has recognized that neglecting that's going to be, as was stated earlier, foolish to say the least. And so we'll keep pushing ahead on the major maintenance component level projects. And as we know here on the agenda later today, the School Facilities Commission will give it, and state construction will give us a little insight into what they're looking at going forward. Further questions on this historical revenue sources and how that worked? Trying to watch all of you here, and so I'll be patient. All right, I think it looks like we're out of questions and kind of have it wrapped up. We may come back later in the day to some of this information as we hear other stuff being presented. But with that, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, and Ms. Mumford with the local bonding options. Oh, excuse me, before you start, Ms. Mumford, Representative Summers. Albert, Representative. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just a quick question on process. And I don't know if anybody signed up for public comment, but where in the process today are you going to allow for public comment, just so I know? Just curiosity. Thank you.
Members, I think we'll do some public comment right before our break at 10 o'clock once we wrap up this bonding's option topic. Just because it is a little more cumbersome to do the public comment, I think we'll lump a couple topics together and then do the public comment. If that's okay with the committee. If the committee wants to hear it right now, we can do it right now. Seeing no major consternation with waiting a few minutes, we'll do public comment at prior to our 10 o'clock break at the end of the presentation that's about to begin. So Ms. Mumford, I think you're on stage, so off we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anna Mumford, LSO. One of the topics the committee discussed considering this interim was local bonding options. As the chairman already kind of pointed out, we discussed with him how he would want to see this presentation. And so at their direction, we prepared a refresher for the committee on the 4 Campbell cases and specifically what the cases said about bonding. And then we have also prepared a general overview of current bonding options. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I am going to share my screen so the committee can follow along with the PowerPoint.
Sounds good. You're in charge.
Mr. Chairman, can you see the PowerPoint? I see some heads nodding, so I'll move on. So in general, the Campbell cases provide that the state bears the burden of funding and providing constitutionally adequate facilities to school districts that provide an equal opportunity for a quality education. Starting with Campbell 1, prior to Campbell 1, school districts generally funded new building needs and building renovation and repair needs by issuing bonds for capital construction. Wyoming Constitution Article 16, Section 5 prohibits the school district from bonding beyond 10% of the assessed value of the school district. Because of low assessed valuation, 5 school districts at that time exceeded 100% of legal bonded indebtedness, and additionally, less wealthy districts could not rely on bonds to finance needed capital construction. The statutes at that time provided 2 mechanisms to assist counties with low assessed valuations and financing needed school facilities. First, there was a mill levy supplement program, and second, the state had a grant fund to provide to needy districts so long as the districts had reached 80% of their bonding capacity. An independent study at that time found that over $275 million was needed in capital facility expenditures, although the legislature had transferred capital funds designated for facilities to the foundation program to meet operation expenses. And at the time of trial, only about $5 million was designated as capital funding. Campbell 1 was decided in 1995. The Wyoming Supreme Court found that because the right to an equal opportunity to a proper education was constitutionally recognized in Wyoming, Any state action interfering with that right must be closely examined before it can be said to pass constitutional muster. The court determined that the challengers in this case had showed constitutional harm, writing specifically that capital construction financing is unavailable for many. Safe and efficient physical facilities with which to carry on the process of education are a necessary element of the total educational process. State funds must be readily available for those needs. It simply will not do to set up a legislative scheme to raise funds for that purpose and then turn around and allow those funds to be diverted for another purpose. And Mr. Chairman, I do see that Representative Larson has raised his hand.
Your microphone's not on, Representative Larson.
How's that? Is that better? Mr. Chairman, if I could go back to the previous slide and where you talked about down there on the third bullet that an independent state commission study found that over $275 million was needed in capital facility expenditures. You made a comment there that there had been operational funds that had been sent towards school districts, but only 5 million of it. Did I catch that right? That there was 275 million in needs, but we probably only sent around 5 million to satisfy that need, and the rest was just operational.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, correct. There was the study found that over 275 million was needed, but the legislature transferred capital funds designated for facilities to the foundation program for operation expenses instead. And then there was only about 5 million actually designated as capital funding.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, go ahead and please proceed, Ms. Mum.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, that will take me to Campbell 2. So in 1999, the legislature responded to Campbell 1 by continuing the mill levy supplement program and revising the grant program. Districts now needed to reach 90% of their bonding capacity and demonstrate that the proposed capital construction projects would remedy or replace facilities which were determined to be inadequate and in need of immediate capital construction. If a facility was deemed inadequate and an immediate need, the Department of Education would report that to 2 committees, which would then make recommendations to the governor and the legislature, who may then or may not act to appropriate funds. The court in Campbell 2 noted that the statutory scheme funded capital construction by placing the financial burden primarily on school districts through bonded indebtedness, and that school districts had not imposed this uniformly. The court also noted that the legislature again studied capital construction needs and found needs had risen dramatically, and we're at over 565 million, along with 303 million in deferred maintenance. Campbell 2 was decided in February 2001. The court reiterated that any system that places a primary financial burden of providing constitutionally adequate facilities on school districts through local mill levy taxation and local bonds was wealth-based and inherently inequitable. The court said that the legislature must fund the facilities deemed required by the state for the delivery of the full basket to students through either a statewide tax or through other revenue-raising mechanisms equally imposed on all taxpayers. Individual districts could fund additional facilities deemed appropriate enhancements with locally raised revenues. In Campbell 2, the court ordered that all facilities must be made safe and efficient, and the legislature must provide a plan by July 1, 2002 to remedy these deficiencies within 6 years, and there was a shorter timeline for some certain high need buildings. In Campbell 3, decided in October of that same year, 2001, the court clarified certain points within the Campbell 2 decision. The court summarized the state's constitutional obligation regarding school facilities. Specifically, the court said that the Constitution simply requires the state to provide capital construction funding of the facilities in the amount deemed necessary to provide facilities capable of delivering the level of educational services determined appropriate by the state. If a local school district sought funding in excess of that required to meet state standards, the state was not obligated to provide such funding, and the local school district could seek it from other sources. The court also clarified that school districts were no longer required to have reached 90% of their bonding capacity in order to receive state assistance. Lastly, the court affirmed a school district's use of local bonds to improve the quality of education delivered to its students through innovation and modernization. Moving on to the Campbell Ford case. Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson has a question.
Representative Larson, please proceed. Then I'll get to you, Representative Summers, but right now, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Anna, so back there when you talked about at that time in history, when school districts, if they elected to do enhancement, could find other funding sources, what responsibility was placed on them for the major maintenance and operation and upkeep of those? Did that come back to I know that we cover most of that now, but at that time, were they responsible for, was it anticipated that they would have to take care of major maintenance on any enhancements that they elected to do?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding of the cases is that at that time they would be responsible for enhancements, and it was the state's obligation to get the facilities up to the standard required.
Thank you.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Anna, on the enhancements piece, it seems to me that inherently that's an inequity. So if you have a rich district that can put all kinds of fancy enhancements on a building or do whatever they want, kind of, I guess, as far as to a building, then that educational opportunity for that district is much higher than the educational opportunity for some other district. So did the court opine on that at the time of why they allowed enhancements at all?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, there was some language in the Campbell cases that discussed that, and they did put it on the state to review the enhancements that the school districts would be developing in order to make sure that it wasn't rising to a level where it was inequitable. And then they also, put it on the state to review the enhancements to see if some of those enhancements needed to be included in the state standard moving forward.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Please follow up.
And so, Mr. Chairman, this question could be for you or any member or Anna, and or school facilities as we get to them. Maybe they can tell me this. So how do we make that determination now that this enhancement that's being placed upon this building is not something that isn't providing more of an opportunity than another student would get in another district? In other words, I would assume that we would have to have in rule and regulation some mechanism to gauge that if in fact that ruling was followed. So if anybody knows that now or later on, please fill me in. Thank you.
Speaker Harshman, would you have any comments on that, as you're one of the longer serving members on the committee, or Senator Landon? And if not, I'll move to state construction and see what their thoughts might be.
My screen, I lost the presentation, but I've got it on another screen, but just disappeared. I can see all of you, but yeah, I think, I think we haven't gone down that road. I think, Representative Summers, really. I think, the idea is that local districts can put some skin in the game as well if they'd like to for some of those special things, because every town's a little different, have different needs or desires. Or Laramie with the high school with the pool, I think, is a classic example. I think other districts are doing those things. I think it'd be interesting to look. Most of it is probably a little bit of extra square footage when you look at these schools, and then the other's probably pools, frankly. And that was a decision, in the Freudenthal administration, tracks, but not pools, 2007 or 8. That was so.
Thank you, Speaker Harshman, for that. Mr. Finney, I think you're in the meeting. Could you offer some insight on that and how the commission reviews that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Brandon Finney, School Facilities Division Administrator. Enhancements are in Chapter 3 of the Commission's Rules and Regulations. That's the adequacy standards. So if a district wants to provide a product such as extra square footage that is greater than the allotment that they're allowed, then it becomes an enhancement, and that cost shall be borne on the district. Some other examples would be gyms, obviously sports facilities. A district may enhance from regular grass seed field to an artificial turf, or the height of a gym to provide some bigger games like volleyball and hold tournaments. Every 4 years per statute, as I believe the attorney was just speaking, we're supposed to review the adequacy standards, look at those enhancements that have been categorized and presented to the commission. If any of those in Section 3, it talks about enhancing the educational program, then the commission shall review those enhancements and perhaps make them a standard.
Representative Summers, I think you probably have a follow-up, and then I'll get to you, Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I do. And Mr. Finney, so you answered the one question that Anna brought up, but my other query that I brought up based on her testimony, but the other one is simply, how do you look at an enhancement and make sure that it is not going to provide a greater opportunity for for a child in that district than other children would have in other districts? In other words, that piece that's the equity issue. And I'll be honest, I have an issue with enhancements and the money we spend on them, and then the money that we come back and spend in major maintenance. So I do want to understand the equity issue and whether you guys address that equity issue at all.
Go ahead, Mr. Finney.
Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up to that, Representative Summers, that's specifically called out, I believe, in 2115-115. It says that the commission shall not hinder the right of a school district to undertake local enhancements to build these elements within their facility. So we simply accept the request to go to the commission. We do log it in our database that they have done an enhancement, and then we analyze those every 4 years per the statute. But the statute specifically says that the commission can't hinder that particular process.
So, Mr. Chairman, just a quick follow-up, and then I'll be quiet. So, Anna, just to end this part for me droning on, could you please send me that piece of the court decision that talks about equity, or whether enhancements exceed equity, or somehow how equity would be related to enhancements, whatever that piece was you were talking about, so I can read it a little more carefully.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, absolutely. I did just pull that piece out of the case, though. The court discussed it in 2008 in Campbell 4, and I'll just read it really quickly. It's just a couple sentences where they acknowledged this. They recognized it could happen. We are aware that the legislature is concerned with where to draw the line and believes examples of excess might include wealthy districts potentially creating new standards for the entire state in areas such as sports by building golf courses for the golf programs or lavish domed arenas with local wealth. Gratuitous luxuries are conceivable, but are not educational innovation that will raise the bar for the rest of the school districts.
Senator Landon, then I'll get to you, Senator Rothfus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Anna, thank you for that. That actually, in part, answered some of my concerns. I was going to take us back to the second finding on Campbell 3, because in my mind, it just feels like that's one of the hinge points that has spawned debate ever since with regard to what Representative Summers has pointed out this morning, but also with regard to what sort of skin in the game can we expect out of our local districts. And my curiosity, Anna, was there anything in that decision that helped you to understand so that you can share with us what struck down the 90% requirement as to bonding capacity? Because that not only prohibits us from asking local districts to step up before we build them a building, but it also opens the door to the concerns that Representative Summers expressed. I hope that makes sense, but that, to me, that seems to be a really important piece of the findings in Campbell 3.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Ann.
Thank you, Senator Landon. I believe my understanding is that because it was very hard for school districts to get to that 90% bonding capacity, so then it made it very hard for them to get grant funding and be able to put that money towards school facilities. So I believe it was just because it was wealth-based and inequitable that they struck that down.
Follow up, Senator Landon, are you happy?
Thank you, Anna. That's helpful. I've got a lot to think about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfus, then I'll get to you, Representative Landon. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, Laramie High School is one of the standout examples of use of enhancements, and I think it's an important conversation. There are a lot of challenges surrounding it. We always talk about the pool here in Laramie, and I can tell you it's a great pool, except for the fact that it's a few inches too short. Make sure you measure that if you ever build a pool. But it's not just a pool. That gets the attention, but we have an expanded auditorium for our theater and arts. We have a massively expanded science technology lab setting to ensure that we're teaching better STEM education. And we have this if you've been to Laramie High School, you probably know about the commons area where the students eat and visit with one another, which a lot of work went into that as part of the enhancement. So you can see that there would be concerns potentially about how those enhancements are handled, and under the Campbell case, it was about assessed valuation. The thing, though, that I think it's important to realize is we have one of the worst assessed valuations per capita anywhere in the state. It's not driven by local wealth. It's driven by local emphasis and desire for a quality education for the students. So my concern when we start trying to think about evening everybody out and having a uniform standard for all students in all circumstances is that leads to taking everybody down to the kind of lowest desired standard by districts. And the idea that Laramie should hold itself back because other school districts don't want to invest in their own education is also unfair. So we have this battling inequity, and I respect the inequity that Representative Summers is discussing, but at the same time, I don't want the fact that other districts are unwilling to put their skin in the game and increase their local property taxes to ensure that the quality education is there, or that a higher education or a forward-looking education is there. So I don't know what the solution is, but I'm always worried when we start talking about the idea that, well, we need everyone to be on the same page. And there are a lot of school districts that don't want any of these amenities to be available, so Laramie shouldn't have it either. That doesn't seem fair any more than the inequity seems fair. And I think it's important to realize it's a complicated issue, and it's not just about who's got wealth. It's about who really wants to put their investments in that local education.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Senator Bebout. Mr. Chairman, this question, I guess, would be back to Brandon. Just wanting to make sure that I understand correctly that once a school district incorporates enhancement into their project, then are those enhancements incorporated into the square footage calculations for maintenance and funding of that? Or are they required to take care of the maintenance and things associated with the enhancements that they elected separately to do? And I think that this plays in a little bit to equity as well, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Finney, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, through you, Representative Larson. So once a district does construct an enhancement, the major maintenance statute does allow them to spend up to 10% of that appropriation, their piece of the pie, on that particular enhancement to maintain it. Also, I do believe that once enhancements are built, that like on the Laramie project, they do also set aside a sinking funds and some money to maintain that particular asset as well.
Follow up on that.
Senator Rothfuss, I'll let you answer that as well.
Yeah, thanks. Just very briefly, I think it's important to answer the point, though, that Representative Larson was asking. There are not additional dollars of major maintenance generated based on the enhancement space that was part of the enhancement bond. But a portion of the enhancement bond is set aside to provide for that major maintenance. In other words, in our instance, we have it covered externally from the state funds, at least the bulk of the costs, and we are allowed to use some of our major maintenance, but no new dollars are generated. I hope that helps.
Senator Wasberger, you had a question a minute ago. I see some other hands and I've got a list, so we'll just keep working down that list.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm just going to comment quickly is that the enhancements that have been done so far in the past have been provided by the electorate of the community itself. They have voted in favor of that tax and allowed themselves to build from the basic high school that we have for students. They enhance it past that. And so I don't see that as a real issue and something to be worried about. So I do think that the comment that Albany County has a low assessed value is true, because I would say that in Gillette, in Campbell County, we couldn't pass a bond issue to enhance schools because the money generated essentially would come from the mineral industry, and the mineral industry is in difficult situation right now. And so I would say that one of the wealthiest counties could never get an enhancement simply because of the situation that they're in right now.
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, listening to this brings in some real challenging thoughts that I've had. Number one, I don't expect all the school districts in the state to have equity of education, because obviously that's not there. But there should be some level of equity there, and it's definitely not there. When I look at the welding shop in the high school at Powell, and it has 6 welders in it, and you couldn't do a project in there if you wanted, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Our CTE programs are cut drastically. Now, part of that was because they wanted an enhanced half of another gym, which seems ridiculous. But on top of that, I look at the expenses, and even though we say, okay, they've got money set aside for the enhancements and all, there's still more wear and tear and more burden on the heating, the cooling, and all of that in those extra enhancements. If you look at the theater, the swimming pool, the culinary, and all in Laramie High School, yeah, I understand that they've got money to cover for maintenance on those, but there are other maintenance factors that I don't think are covered by that. I think it's ended up, because you can't take a portion of it and say, well, the heating is being burdened because of the amount. So I think there's a lot of different areas here. I don't have a good answer. I know what Chris is saying when he's talking about the idea of, I don't know where you draw a line, and I don't either, but I do know there is a considerable difference there, and where that equity really of education comes in, of course, is in the core subjects, which is what the decision really was made towards. But there's so much more to it. I struggle. I really struggle, and I don't have a good answer for it, but I just felt like I needed to bring that up, and the extra expenses.
Thank you, Senator Cost. And I think Senator Landon offers this thought on a regular basis when he says that we like local control until we want to control the locals. And so that's an issue of local control that we try to leave it to them, and we don't always get the results out of the locals at that point. But we continue to work forward and work with the locals on these issues. Representative Freeman, you're next. I have you, Senator Rothfuss, on my list.
And I'll be very brief. I can't remember who made the comment. Is that you know, the locals have to have their skin in the game, and I agree with that. But one of the things that I remember as a teacher, and I'm relying on a 20-year-old memory, is that there was school districts that were not bonding or even using their full amount of money to educate their kids before the Campbell decisions came up. And now what happens is everybody has to tax to a certain extent. So I think that there's a lot more skin in the game than there was before the Campbell decisions. And I think that we should recognize that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Speaker Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to Representative Summers for bringing us up and taking us down this trail. But I think it's important to talk about it. I think because it's all history, right? We've built this airplane while we're flying it, and I think every district is a little bit different. And that's why you have this committee and a commission to examine it. It's not a one size fits all. And you can't, you know, think when we started this, the amount of square footage that we've eliminated across the state, and there are major maintenance statutes, and Brandon can maybe talk about that. We used to fund like 130% of square footage, and then 120 and 110. And so we stepped that down over time, eliminated square footage. But I think, you know, I think you got to pull the common sense thing in here too a little bit. And it says clearly in the, you know, in the Campbell 3, we want local districts to innovate. We want to give parents the freedom. It'd be like telling your parents, hey, you can't do extra work for your kids. We want them to do that. We want to innovate and have freedom to do that. And if they want to tax themselves some more to do that, that's great. But the flip side, and I think it was just talked about, there are some places you can't pass a bond issue. And so then should the kids be held hostage to that? And that's really where it comes down to. And that's where the equity piece. So we've really done a pretty nice job. And there's so many different circumstances. We're trying to correct the deal at Riverton High School now, because that school is built by local taxpayer dollars, like all our schools, with more square footage. But they didn't put an auditorium in. They need an auditorium. We're going to respond to that, you know? And so I think, and we've done that all across the state. And so keep doing the good work on it, but keep allowing innovation and freedom in local communities too, I think. Jeez, why wouldn't we? That's, you know, we don't want a one size fits all deal. That's been tried in other countries around the world. Doesn't work. So thanks, Representative Summers.
Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just let this move forward. Thanks.
Are there any further comments or discussion? Senator Bebout.
Yeah, thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Apologize for being a little late, had something come up. It's really a great discussion to have about enhancements, and Representative Summers, I understand where you're coming from, as well as the speaker. And I think the local control is something I've always really believed in, but but certainly like what happened with Senator Wasserberger up in Campbell County does happen. And so you have that you want the local people say no, but yet the children have that effect. And I understand all that. I guess the one concern that I've always had, and I look at what Laramie did and what Senator Rothfuss talks about, I'm sure all of you have been over there and seen that facility, incredible. And I understand the 2 inches, Chris, I get that. But the thing that I have is when certain districts, and I don't know if there is an answer to this, but I just throw it out there, maybe Anna can talk about it, when they have money that they're available, that they set aside in their savings, that they're able to go forward and do these kind of things, or the state funds these enhancements. And yet you might have a school in Midwest or Shoshone, they may want one, but it just doesn't happen. I'm not saying we want a swimming pool in Shoshone. That's just a concern I have. And I think everything that's been done fits within Campbell. So that's the question I have, Mr. Chairman, for Anna, is when a local district that does have some wealth in terms of their funds that they have on the table or they set aside, and they do that, that in no way, shape, or form creates a constitutional issue. I mean, they have it, they've done it, and that's what they do with it. The local school board votes for it. So that's the first part of the question. Anna, the second part, Mr. Chairman, is it, I don't think the commission makes a decision on whether or not Laramie does what they do, or like what we did with in Cheyenne. The commission doesn't do it, it's a local board decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anna, if you want to answer those questions, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if it'd be better to defer to the School Facilities Commission that's on right now, but I did want to bring up one thing related to this conversation, is that with these local enhancements, that they don't always need to be voted on by a bond. Laramie #1 and Natrona #1, for example, have transferred funds from their block grants to their capital construction accounts to pay for enhancements. But Mr. Chairman, I don't know if Mr. Finney is willing to come on and try to answer that question for Senator Bebout.
Mr. Finney, would you offer your thoughts?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. So districts obviously do it, as Anna just spoke about, through different financing mechanisms. Our commission does not impede them, as the statute 2115-115 does indicate. I will say enhancements are backed out when we do calculate the major maintenance payments. So they're not doubling up or they're not getting additional money, but they do have the flexibility, and it is at the local level to provide at the board to vote for that and how they spend those monies.
Representative Freeman. Excuse me, 1 second, Representative Freeman. Follow up, Senator Bebout. Your mic's not on, Senator Bebout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one follow up in that regard, and I understand on the enhancement side. Just a question to throw out there, and about new schools. And I think in the past, particularly Laramie 1 might have gone to the facilities. I can't remember. Maybe the speaker remembers. It's been quite a while ago, maybe when they built South High School. And I knew that in fact, I think the commission did not want that to go forward and was not in favor of it. Yet Laramie 1 had enough money set aside. They said, we're going to do it anyway. And they did. How does that play into all of this? Maybe that's a question for Brandon.
Well,
Mr. Finney or Anna, whoever.
Mr. Chairman, a little bit on that. So districts can initiate their own project if they do go outside of the normal process, which is coming up through the commission, obviously to this committee and off to the governor and the legislature. That is one of the mechanisms in being determined an enhancement. They need to essentially follow the process. We have quite a bit of governing documents and statutes that prioritize the needs and the flow of how those projects should be appropriated and when they should be in sync.
Does that answer the question, Senator Bebout?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it does.
All right. Thanks for your patience. Representative Freeman, you're up.
Thank you. I should know this answer, but I can't remember. The high school in my community was the last one that was bonded and built by the local school district. And we anticipated a populations increase that didn't happen. So we have a high school larger than what's that would be deemed acceptable under today's standards. What do you do with major maintenance on that? Does that, do they get dinged for that because they still have to maintain the space?
Mr. Finney?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Freeman, that's in the major maintenance statute, and it does give them 115% of the allowable or the gross. I believe it's whichever one is less. So it restricts them down. And I'll pull that up and double check and verify here.
Thank you. Representative Larson, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two potential questions for Mr. Finney, if I may. The first one, Brandon, did I understand you correctly that the major maintenance is allocated on a square footage that may not include enhancements, but those funds can be used as determined by the district to cover the needs of any part of the school, including the enhancements?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, major maintenance or the enhancements are netted out, and then we make the calculation, and they are allowed to spend up to 10% to maintain the enhancements. And we do have a work order system, so they submit a work order if they want to do a particular component, spend their major maintenance. We double check on what that component is and then make the determination to spend the funds.
So then, Mr. Chairman, follow up with my second question, if I may. So
please proceed.
So then, Brandon, what you have is you have an increased square footage without an increase of major maintenance funds. And so do you have any discretion from the Department of Construction and School Facilities there to, if there's multiple major maintenance issues in a building, some of which may be part of the traditional building and other parts may be in an enhanced area, do you require that the non-enhanced area is maintained first, or how does that work? I just see a reduced pool of money there to take care of an enhanced square footage with major maintenance.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, we look at the facility as a whole. We can't just maintain a portion, especially when you have extra square footage added to the facility. So mainly making sure that it complies with the major maintenance statute and it is a component that can be repaired or replaced. And to add on to the response to Representative Freeman, it's lesser of the gross square footage or 115% of the allowable. So there is restrictions on what they get paid out. So you can't just keep adding and adding.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little bit lost though, Brandon, if I could. And so you've got that square footage, that 115% allowable, which does not include an enhanced area. Mm-hmm. And so if there's a major maintenance requirement in the enhanced area and also major maintenance requirements in the non-enhanced area, is that what I see is we've got increased square footage that we're trying to handle with a limited amount of major maintenance dollars. And so then do you pick and choose if the major maintenance would go to the enhanced area in lieu of the needs on the non-enhanced area, or is there an evaluation process there?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, one of the evaluation criteria is looking at the component. We do a condition assessment. So our project managers would work with the school district to see if maybe the enhancement scored a 3 or 4, and then the other parts a 1 or a 2. We would try to focus the funds on the failing component first.
Representative Larson, to further answer that, they look at it as a total project, and then they evaluate how much of that total project is the enhancement cost and how much is the standard part of the school cost. And they work with the district and tell the district, okay, the total bill is X, and your share of it that you have to come up with internal funds, a block grant, however else you want to do it, will be this amount of that project. And so they don't necessarily, it's all part of that work order that he discussed. And so as they look at it, they calculate who's paying what and where the funds can come from on that front. So hopefully that helps answer that a little bit better.
It does make it much more clear, but if I hear you correctly, they can pull that out of their block grant funds as well.
They can pull it out of any, if they're required to pay for it, it can come from any source the district has available to them, other than on the enhancement, other than the major maintenance dollars once it exceeds the 10% that they're allowed to spend on the enhancement. And so just as they can pull any money out of that block grant for other purposes, they can for maintenance if they need as well.
And Mr. Chairman, to add on to that, we don't prioritize the district's request. They have facility plans and put that together. Their facilities directors go through and does the prioritization.
Okay, I think we've wrapped up some of this discussion. Ms. Mumford, I think you can continue with your presentation. Sorry for the little detour.
Great, Mr. Chairman, I'll just go ahead and put that PowerPoint back on.
Perfect.
Okay, we are moving on to Campbell 4 case. As a result of the Campbell 2 decision, in 2002, the legislature overhauled the statutory scheme for capital construction of public schools and created a statewide program from funding construction of facilities necessary to meet state-determined standards. In 2005, that system was reviewed by the district court, which was notified by the state that it had not met the mandate to remedy immediate need facilities within that timeline required by the Supreme Court. The state informed the district court that the overall conditions of facilities required considerable effort to meet the Supreme Court's mandate. While the district court held that the state had not met its mandate, it's determined that the remedy was a case-by-case resolution. And then in Campbell 4, which was decided in 2008, the Wyoming Supreme Court agreed with the district court's decision and found that the state had acted in good faith in trying to meet the mandate through research-based policymaking, statutory enactment, and appropriations of large sums. The court also examined the constitutionality of the statutory and regulatory schemes enacted since it imposed its mandate, and found that the deficiencies and failures were not the result of an unconstitutional system. The court found that the scheme, the statutory scheme, 1, provided for capital construction funding from state wealth without reliance upon local wealth. 2, mandated facilities be remedied to a point requiring only routine maintenance. And 3, made adequacy of facilities a function of delivering adequate educational programs. The court also noted that the legislature had empowered the School Facilities Commission to build adequate and equitable facilities capable of delivering the educational programs prescribed by laws and the state standard. And as we've been discussing, anything desired by the school districts over and above that was a local enhancement for which local bonding would be required. So with that, I'll go briefly into some local bonding options. In general, the issuance of general obligation or revenue bonds is a pay later approach to funding government. General obligation bonds are paid by pledging future tax revenues, while revenue bonds are paid by pledging future non-tax revenues. And each type of bond has its own legal requirements and limitations.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bebout.
Sorry for interrupting, Mr. Chairman. If Anna could go back to that previous slide, I just had one quick question. To the previous one to that. Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. On local enhancements must be paid for by a school district through local bonding. There must be a lot of latitude in that because a lot of local enhancements are not paid by local bonding. They're paid with reserves. How does that fit into that Campbell 4 case?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bebout, that is correct. I just took that quote right out of the case, but I do believe that school districts can use other local mechanisms to fund local enhancements.
Well, so Mr. Chairman, then the question is, it does not violate Campbell 4 when they do that, correct?
Anna?
Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't say so, but I don't know if that's ever been challenged, the other mechanisms that they've been using. I do know there was a much broader sentence in an earlier case that talked about local enhancements by locally raised revenues, which could include taxes. So I don't believe it would be unconstitutional under the Campbell cases.
Ms. Mumford, do we have what's our statutory structure say about local enhancements and paying for them, or do you have that handy?
Mr. Chairman, I do not have that handy. I can stop sharing the screen and see if the School Facilities Commission knows that statute.
Mr. Finney?
Mr. Chairman, we'll have to do some data mining on that one.
Senator Wiebout, we'll get back to you on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry for the interruption.
Representative Freeman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recently toured I guess it would be an enhancement, but the expansion of the CTE program that was done by private donors. So what happens with major maintenance on something like that? Does that become part of the school district's major maintenance? From what I saw, it needed to be done.
Mr. Finney?
And Mr. Chairman, if a school district does accept a gift or something, an example of a current one is in Teton. I believe they had a little bit of a sports baseball practice area donated by a local individual. That does have to go before the commission. It does get acknowledged and logged as an enhancement, and then it falls into the same categories as all other enhancements. And we'll get some, on that last question, we'll get some legal counsel on the statute requirements that was requested on local enhancements for you.
Follow up, Representative Freeman.
Yeah, just quickly, because what that did is it actually enhanced the, or made possible, would probably be a better way of saying it, their CTE education. So I don't know if that's an enhancement or their just ability to carry out the core mission of the school.
Okay. Because it is about 10, I think, Anna, we will wait to get into the various bonding options until after we take a break. So committee, I think we'll take about a 15-minute break. So we'll come back at 10:15. And once we complete that, the bonding issue, we will then take the public comment. Okay, committee, I think we're ready to get back to work. Karen, if you can get us started. Looks like we have most everybody here. Senator Wasserberger was here just a moment ago, so I'm sure he's not far off. Speaker Harshman will be back soon, I'm sure. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. I had a quick note from Mr. Finney saying he had looked up some of the statutes regarding enhancements and funding that would answer the question we had just before our break about if it has to be bonding versus using local funds of other sources. So before we get into the bonding discussion, I think we'll have Mr. Finney answer that question.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just to
go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the question that I wrote down is, what are the applicable statutes in place that deal with local enhancements? I'd like to first say I am not an attorney. So this is about a matter of 10 minutes of diving into the documents. But Wyoming Statute 2115-109, no gross square footage created by a district enhancement shall be included in the district's gross square footage when computing the major maintenance. So we talked about that. 2115-109F is districts may expend up to 10% of their amounts on the enhancements. So we discussed that one. 2115-111A Romanet 3 is a definition of local enhancement. 2115-114A IX is where the commission needs to create a process to identify local enhancements. And that is also done then in Rules and Regulations, Chapter 3. So that process has been established. 2115-115C talks about doing a review of that, not less than every 4 years, to look at those enhancements that have been built on an annual 4-year basis to determine if any of those enhancements should be brought into the adequacy standards to improve the educational program. 2115-115D, the commission shall not hinder or curtail the right of a school district to undertake local enhancements to buildings and facilities which are in excess of state building adequacy standards as permitted by law. So we can't stop them from doing that. That does give them the flexibility and the local control. 2115-116A talks about the rules and regulations of the commission on enhancements. And I'd also like to add, once you get into Chapter 3, which is the next level down under statutes, on the rules and regs, it has the whole process of it is an enhancement, adequacy standards. What's greater than that is in excess is considered enhancement. But I'd also like to add that we have a pretty good process. Chapter 14 of the rules and regulations, Section 8 has the whole value engineering process. So as these bigger projects are developed, designed, they go through a VE, value engineering process. We have a professional third-party consultant that looks at the plans and specifications and benchmarks them to the design guidelines of the School Facilities Commission, as well as the rules and regulations, and does another quality control check. So the process is pretty robust. There's a lot of statutes in place spread out. This is what I was able to gather within the 10 minutes that we had to look it up.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, and I apologize, but I do have a quick question of Anna. She can look it up and provide me the answer later, but does the state, since the state has a law that says hands off on enhancements, basically, can the legislature, can the state restrict enhancements? In other words, do we even have authority, or is that something that either based on a Campbell decision or whatever is basically a local level decision that the state cannot constrict? So my question is, can the state constrict local enhancements?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I'm not prepared to answer that question right now, but I can definitely get back to the committee on that.
Very good. Are there any other questions regarding the information Mr. Finney just provided us? All right, moving on. I think, Ms. Mumford, we're ready for you to continue the discussion. We had left off just getting started talking about local bonding options on your PowerPoint. And so I think that's where we'll kick it off again right there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just sharing the screen. So starting with the general obligation bonds, and again, these are just going to be a very general overview of the different bonds, but general obligation bonds create debt in the constitutional use of that term because there is a present legal potential that the issuing governmental entity will have to exercise its power to tax to pay the bonds. The issuance of state general obligation bonds then triggers the state's debt limit under Article 16, Section 1 of the Wyoming Constitution, which prohibits the state from creating debt in excess of 1% of the total statewide assessed property valuation as shown by the last general assessment. The issuance of state general obligation bonds also triggers Article 16, Section 2's election requirement, which requires a proposition to create such debt to be submitted to a vote of the people and approved. Second are revenue bonds. These bonds entail payment pledges that do not create debt in the constitutional use of that term because there is no present legal potential that the issuing governmental entity will have to exercise its power to tax to pay the bonds. Revenue bondholders can seek repayment only from pledged revenue sources. The issuance of state revenue bonds, therefore, does not trigger the constitutional's debt limitation or election requirement. And non-state tax revenue sources that are available to pledge include federal mineral royalties, lease bonus payments, and earnings from investments. And Mr. Chairman, I believe Representative Larson had his hand up.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on the general obligation bonds and under the caption of local bonding, is the requirement for a general obligation bond the same for a local school district as it would be, say, for the state as a whole at that 1%? I think you said 1% of the state valuation, but when I look at local, I would assume that that would mean the local school district. And do they have that? Is it the same there on a obligation bond that they're at 1% of their local valuation?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that's correct. I am being specific to state general obligation bonds for purposes of these slides for the options for the state for bonding. I would have to double check on the local bonding requirements.
So we're talking everything you're talking here because of the Campbell cases and the obligation being back to the state is the obligation back to the state.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, yes, I'm talking about the state obligation.
Thank you. It's not hard to lose me.
Any other questions? Seeing none, please proceed.
Going back to revenue bonds, under existing statute, the School Facilities Commission may issue up to $100 million in revenue bonds for school capital construction purposes. It is my understanding that this authority has never been exercised for purposes of funding the state's obligation for school construction or operations. These bonds, if issued by the School Facilities Commission, are funded by the 1/3 state mineral royalties that would otherwise be deposited in the school capital construction account. You recall that Leanne brought up earlier that account is being changed to the School Lands Mineral Royalties account July 1, 2020. But after available state mineral royalties have been pledged, any investment income from the common school account, which would otherwise be distributed to the school foundation program, shall also be pledged as necessary to pay these bonds. And additional revenue sources must replace any revenues diverted from these accounts to guarantee payment of these revenue bonds. And Mr. Chairman, I stopped sharing the screen just because I believe there's some questions.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if the state commissions decides to issue $100 million worth of revenue bonds, does that have to have any kind of approval by this committee or by the legislature?
Ms. Mumford, did you catch that question? I think it's for you.
I did, Mr. Chairman. I was trying to pull up the statute for that, but I was wondering if maybe Mr. Finney knows off the top of his head that process.
Mr. Chairman, we have never exercised that statute to date. As far as the approval process, I'm not aware. I do know that everything does have to go through the select committee and up through the governor through IBAR. So I would assume that the statute would still follow the same process and not just allow the commission to get $100 million and start building projects. But we'd have to double check the legal side of that.
Follow up, Representative Freeman.
I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anna, do you have any more you want to add to Mr. Finney's thoughts there?
I do not, Mr. Chairman, but that statute that talks about these revenue bonds is Wyoming Statute 21-15-108.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The $100 million, I believe, is a statutory limit. What I'm curious about, and maybe somebody who's looked at revenue bonds in other contexts, maybe Speaker Harshman has some insight into this. If we have FMRs available that we're using for school CapCon already, those can be a source of the revenue for revenue bonds that do not count against our bonded indebtedness. And I'm curious what the actual limit of revenue bond debt, what that could be, or what we could sustain with the amount of federal mineral royalties that we have within our current school facilities context. I don't know if anyone's done that calculation, and maybe Brandon has looked at that. Has anyone looked at that?
Mr. Finney or Speaker Harshman, do either of you have a thought on the senator's question?
So the FMRs is a little over 5 million. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I don't know what that ratio, and we've had a statutory thing like 1.5, 1.5. Just little league math off the top of my head. If we lowered that a little bit, I think you could probably do something around 50, maybe 70 million in bonding off those 5 million FMRs, which, you know, in reality, we've done a great job. We paid a cold hard cash for all this, and the lowest interest rates in the history of mankind during all of it.
Yeah, we shouldn't have done that, but
we should have been borrowing all, investing the rest. But anyway, it's hard to sell that, and you know, but we've done a great job. But man, but anyway, that's my take. 50 to 70 million, little league math. It's probably not right.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Finney, please.
Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up, I just want to jump back to, you guys asked about the approval process. I looked up 21-15-108, which gives the $100 million bonding capacity. In paragraph B, it says, and approved by the legislature under 21-15-119. When I go to 119, that is the commission budget and funding recommendation. So if we were to raise that capital through the bonding, I assume, but I looked it up and I was correct that then it would go through the standard process. So it goes to the commission, the prioritization, it goes off to the select committee. That statute 21-15-119, commission budget and funding recommendations is the standard process. So it would come before you guys and the legislature.
Thank you for that information. Further questions on revenue bonds? Seeing none, Ms. Mumford, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's just one more slide, so I'm not going to share the screen for that because there's not much on it anyway. The last one are the lease revenue bonds. This is where a government can generate revenue by bonding through a third-party nonprofit corporation, whereby the government transfer property to that corporation which finances the transfer by issuing special obligation bonds. The nonprofit corporation then leases the property back to the government, and the government's lease payments are used to pay the bonds. This leasing does not create any debt in the constitutional use of that term because the government has the right to cancel the lease at any time. And it's my understanding that this has also never been exercised for purposes of funding the state's obligation for school capital construction. There are statutes, Wyoming Statute 2115-112 and 2115-119 that contain the procedures and requirements for this type of leasing. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will open it up to any committee discussion and any request for LSO to provide additional information on this topic.
Anna, thank you very much. Great information. Certainly appreciate it. Committee, further questions for Anna or anyone else at this point? Representative Larson. Then I'll lower your hand. Anyone else?
Scratching my nose, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Are there any bill drafts that anyone wants to come up with, or we can work on it towards the end of the day as well, regarding bonding or restrictions on capital construction or expansion of a capital construction or anything like that? Keep those in mind, and we can offer them now, or we can offer them later in the day at the end of the meeting. Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, I'll wait till the end, but I'm probably going to try to develop a motion on how major maintenance money can be used for enhancements to try to restrict that a little more.
Okay, sounds good. With that, and Karen and Anna and Leanne, you may have to help me. Public comment. We had said we'll do some public comment here at the end of this subject, and we've discussed two different things this morning so far. One being the historical financing of school capital construction, and now the revenue bond or the bonding issues and the Campbell decisions. Is there any public comment, or how do I go about public comment, Karen or Leanne? And I see we have the chairman from the School Facilities Commission is on, if he has anything to offer.
Representative Walters, we did not receive any submissions for public comment via the website. Other than those commissioners, those who are already admitted to the meeting, there is no one that we would need to bring out from the waiting room.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I couldn't hear any of that. I don't know if I'm the only committee member who didn't, but hopefully you could hear it better than me.
I heard just a little bit. Karen, could you repeat what you offered? It was a little bit muffled.
My apologies. Other than those that are already in the meeting, for example, the commission, we do not have anyone from the waiting room that needs to be admitted. There weren't any additional submissions via the website.
Okay. That's what I thought you had said, but I couldn't quite make it out as well. So thank you. Commission Chairman Garland, please.
Yeah, I have no comments at this time.
Okay. Sounds good. Anything else on these subjects, committee? Seeing none, we will move on to our report from State Construction and the School Facilities Division. So I think Mr. Finney, Mr. Severson, Mr. Muldrow, whoever you guys have decided drew the short straw, go ahead and line up and present however you'd like.
Mr. Chairman, Mel Muldrow, Interim Director of State Construction Department. Before I hand the program over to Mr. Finney and Paul, I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments. I promise I will not be Director McComey and do a 1-hour dissertation. I'll keep this pretty quick and simple for you.
We appreciate that.
No problem. Mr. Chairman, members, first, just let me make a brief comment. This is my first select committee, and over the last couple of hours, it's been very educational for me. The discussion on capital construction, revenue sources, bonding, and conversation on enhancements, the stimulated conversation between the committee members, also the information provided by Leanne and Anna has been just absolutely phenomenal for me to have a better understanding of how the school facility division and how the select committee functions. So thank you very much for that. I just want to make a quick comment about that. Again, just a brief update on the state of construction of the State Construction Department. We continue to be focused on getting to the next level of refinement within the organization. The intent of the legislation, as you remember, with construction management in school facilities, was for the organization to be better able to leverage the synergies between the department. And just to give you a brief update on some of the things that we've been working on, we've been aligning our processes to make them more fluid within the division. On a finance standpoint, we're able to track CapCon, major maintenance, operational expenses as a whole between school facilities division and the construction management division. Our AIM program, as you know, is now set up for both divisions. Construction management was not part of AIM initially, but we've been able to bring it into the construction management side. General Services is using it 100% for CapCon and major maintenance projects, so that process is really working well. We've also been able to track our portfolio sizes, condition of facilities, our financial liabilities much better than we were able to in the past. On the facility planning side, for both the school side and the CM side, we've worked diligently the last couple of years, but the program is getting better every year. School facilities have been doing it now for 7, 8, 9 years, and the construction side has now been doing it for 3 years. And I can tell you, the facility planning team is very astute at what they do. They really allow the construction side to really be able to better do planning, be it either for state buildings, community colleges, University of Wyoming, and so on. Condition assessments, school facility is working on updating the profit profiles and space measurements in 2020. Once educational suitability study is completed, the assessments will then be performed. On the CM side, at the end of this year, we will be going out to do our 5-year plan. As you know, the state side is required to do it every 5 years. We do updates every year during the facility planning process, but we held off after we got into this sort of financial piece we're in now. And with COVID, we decided to not try to do both at the same time. We will go back later in the year and still follow up and do the construction management's building assessments. We've been able to maximize on human resources. As you know, our project managers, we're both working separately. Now we're able to be a little more fluid. We have some project managers that are working on the school side, school project managers helping us. IA, a great example of that, and Representative Larson would be able to back me up on this one. We've got Lance helping us on the state hospital project, and Lance is doing a great job. And the same thing with people like Billy Holmes, who actually works for the Department of Health, but he works out of our office and he helps us on projects on the CM side also. So I think as an organization, and as we've looked at the best way to use our project managers, we really have seen some great improvements there. We're in the process of updating all of our governing documents, some of which you will hear about today later in the SFC program. We're working, the big project we're working on now, we're working on the procurement rules for State Construction Department. As you know, these resulted from House Bill 5052, where SCD, we've hired a group called Public Knowledge LLC. They're a local group. They're helping us to develop the rules, contracts, and procurement processes. As you know, we have to stand up the procurement process for state construction in October. We're working diligently with that. We meet every week, a couple of hours a week with the team, and that process is moving along quite well. We're developing standard operating procedures to streamline the processes and provide consistency to our stakeholders. We're also conducting a study for the governor's office to review energy efficiencies on facilities and analyzing the financial savings that may exist. That project is moving along good. It's in its final reviews now. Our goal is to present that to the governor's office, to the SBC, and then push that forward to the legislature once we get the okay from the executive branch on that. And then we worked diligently with the Community College Commission. As you know, we had problems over the years getting their priorities set up to where they made sense for everyone. And I think we've done a good job of getting that process done. I think you saw that in the last legislative session. So with that, Mr. Chairman, committee members, that's my update on the State Construction Department. And if you have any questions, I'm open for that.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Mel, thank you. And just briefly, but if we have, for example, deep budget cuts and we have to cut 30%, let's say, out of your department or out of your people, what will that do to our ability to actually put projects on the ground in the state of Wyoming, particularly school facilities, but as well as state facilities? So will there, what kind of impact will that be? And I think of this committee, if we're talking about doing this, that, or the other, if there's no people behind the scenes doing this, that, and the other, can we even do it? So my question to you is where will it, do you have any, I guess you don't know where the cuts will be, but tell us a little bit about what impact could happen based upon 30%, let's say, your staff went away. What would happen?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, to be frank with you, and we've had that conversation recently, as you know, 30% could be, goodness, I don't know what the word I want to use here. That could be just devastating, I think, to the work that we do, not just the department. So let's look at it this way. We're a small agency of about 30 people. That means that would cut our office to 20. Right now, if I could give you an example, we only have, out of the office, there's only 10 project managers that are actually out in the field all the time. And that's 10 people doing a volume of work. We did a financial look at it when we were truing up the numbers on what's our average amount of work going on in the state for CapCon and major maintenance. And Brandon, help me remember, but I think that number is somewhere in the tune of about 1.5, 1.6 billion, 1.7 billion of construction work contracted out that's happening all the time. That's in some process, either in the beginning, in the middle, at the end of a process. So if you take that and then look at how do you manage that with that handful of people, also understanding the rest of the staff are critical staff people too, because you're talking about accounting, you're talking about IT, you're talking about the AIM program, management of that, managing facility planning. I mean, we don't have any fluff in our system at all. And in fact, as we look at the total department, if you look at the capital project, once we've got one person there, which is a contracts person. When the capital project, that person was funded by the project itself. That person goes away at the end of the year next year. So that person will be gone. And so that's one person that we relied on to help through the project and on other projects at the same time. We don't have any real fluff there. Then I think the other question, Representative Summers, is, as you know, we've heard boots on the ground, boots on the ground, boots on the ground is how you get a good project. And honestly, if you want to see a project fail, it's when we don't have project managers on the site. And so there are no options for that. If we're not on the job site, we're doing it via telemeetings and all that, and things get missed. Things happen on job sites. And I think there's not a one of you sitting in that room right now who hasn't heard about bad projects. You know, some of the older projects we had out there before state construction was around were some bad projects, and they were because they just didn't have people on the site. We've hired extra people to work on places like the Capitol office building. We've got extra work on the state hospital. We had extra work on the Capitol project. And even with that, those projects are still difficult to manage and maintain. Hopefully I answered your question, but I think that if the question really is what effect it would have, to me, I think it would be catastrophic. Our workload has not gone down. Even though we didn't get a capital budget this year, let's assume we get a couple of projects later on in some of the next sessions out here. That's still a lot of work when you look at level 1, 2 planning, level 3 design, and then working the project. You can't do it without a construction staff, either on the school side or on the construction side. And the only difference really is that, the districts own their contracts, and the state side, we own the contract. So we have a little more direction and hands-on, maybe, if I had to say that. But both sides of the house would be catastrophically affected if we lost 10% of our staff. Now, from an operational standpoint, Brandon and I and Laura and the executive staff within the department have been already working on what if we have cuts, 2%, 3%, 5%. Now we know 10% will probably be our first sway in the first level of this that we've been asked to look at. And that is hard because, as you know, our budgets are not robust budgets. From an operational stand, to take 10% out, we might be able to squeeze that out, but it's gonna even that will hurt. But if we get into 20 and 30%, off the top of my head, I don't know how we would achieve that. But we surely will do what we're mandated to do. We'll find a way to do it, but it surely will hurt our ability to do capital construction and major maintenance.
Follow up, Representative Summers, are you happy? Further questions for Mr. Muldrow? Okay, Mr. Finney?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add to that, one of the downsides, no one can predict the situation that we're in today, but as the director was speaking, one of the tasks or charge was to create efficiency. So I'm looking at our staff. We cut 11% of our staff from the time the bill passed and we created the state construction department. We were at 34 people. Since then, we already started cutting back and we cut down to 30. So that's 11.7% of our staff we decreased, trying to create efficiencies and everything, which is running quite well. But now we have new circumstances and challenges facing us. And then also projects under management, just for clarification, when I presented to the Joint Appropriations Committee, at that time we had $1.7 billion under management, 5,101 projects. So as the director said, ultimately we'd have to stop projects, or providing the management on these projects. So we were on a good track to already start the cuts. We were doing it just to trim the fat, but now it's at a different, through a different lens. So.
Okay, Mr. Muldrow or Mr. Finney, who's up next?
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I could, so today we have 6 particular items to present to the committee. One of the items I'd like to circle back. In the fall of 2019, we requested a particular item about comparable construction cost in the October meeting. Since we didn't have any additional meetings after that point, we'd like to follow up, make sure that we provide that deliverable to you. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Laura Anderson, who is in charge of our finance.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning.
As Brandon said, our first report that we'd like to present to the committee this morning was a result of the October 28th, 2019 meeting. It was a request from Representative Summers to give a report on the comparable construction costs. The purpose of the analysis was to determine the regional construction costs for educational facilities and compare those to our actual experience in Wyoming. There are several considerations that make it difficult to make a direct comparison. One is the unique and locally driven nature of each project, and another is the building design and project execution, which is also unique. So in order to do this appropriately and compare really apples to apples, excuse me, we start with regional information from a construction research organization. We modify it based on our own experience and our own data. RS means square foot cost is one of the most recent sources of construction research information in the industry. It's pretty standard. Many states use it when calculating money to either repair or maintain schools. So in order, again, to make sure that we're making a good comparison, RS Means provides a general building cost based on several modifiers. They look at the state as a whole by looking at specific areas within the state and then combining that and averaging it to get a construction cost. The modifiers in Wyoming consist of Cheyenne, Yellowstone, Wheatland, Rawlins, Worland, Riverton, Casper, Newcastle, Sheridan, and Rock Springs. Then, in order to make sure that we really are comparing apples to apples, we have to put in parameters that specify what building we're looking at. So we don't just look at an elementary school. We look at an elementary school with specific configuration that has for example, a face brick with a concrete block or something along those lines. So in order to make sure that we're being even, we mirrored the criteria that we generally use when doing our major maintenance calculations. Once this is done, I believe the committee has a copy of the report. On page 3 of that report, you can see all of the information that comes out of the RS Means. If you look at the regional averages, you'll see that the overall average, South Dakota has the lowest cost at $165.95 per square foot. Wyoming's the second lowest at $170.33, and Idaho's the most expensive at $187.18. However, RS Means does cost per square foot doesn't really include all of the costs that we actually incur when we're doing a building. We have all kinds of additional costs like special structures, gymnasiums, auditoriums, multi-purpose gyms. There's site costs like parking lots and landscaping and playgrounds, demolition and asbestos abatement. Those are all things that go into the cost of the building that we build that would not be reflected in the RS Means costs. So in order to track that and give the committee a better idea of what those costs are, we actually collect data on every project that we do. It's site specific, it's community specific, and it shows the actual construction bids per square foot for each project that we've done in the state. This information is included each year in our annual report, and I've included a copy of the graph that shows that information on page 4 of our report. If you're looking at that graph information, you'll see that currently we're running about $274 per square foot, which includes all those additional costs. And that's about $104 per square foot difference from what we show in RS Means. I hope that answers the committee's question and Representative Summers' request.
Representative Summers, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I really appreciate the information, though I guess I still have to ponder. So we go up to $274 per square foot. But really, we can't compare that back to those other states' RS because it's likely they have the same challenge. You know, I mean, there's probably still not apples to apples. So the apples to apples would be the RS, I would assume. And that's the best apples to apples comparison we'd have. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct. That's why we take out all those, if you take out all those extraneous factors, the RS Means is the only methodology we really have of doing that and making, like you said, an apples to apples comparison. So that is the best comparison that we have, but we wanted to let you know there are additional factors and we wanted to let you know what we're actually running on an average cost per square foot as opposed to what the RS Means says.
And then, Mr. Chairman, just a quick follow up on the chart. Laura, if I look at, well, I'm trying to find the chart here. So I look at 2020, we have a diamond up there in between a couple of high points, one over $400 per square foot and one over 300. So could you kind of, you know, is our curve suddenly turning up really fast? Because the chart would seem to imply that costs are rising significantly, or did before this COVID deal.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Representative Summers, part of the problem that we're having is because we had a little bit of a slowdown in the number of projects that we've done, and some of them have been larger. The marks that you're showing, the John Schiffer Alternative School was at $458 per square foot, and the Rock Springs Satellite School was at $331 per square foot. And that's what's showing, that's what you're seeing on the chart where that jump happened.
So just a quick follow up then, the most recent buildings are showing a substantial increase over that 274. So my question is kind of to you all, and maybe this is to Brandon or whoever, based upon what we're seeing happening in the world right now, would we expect to see some deflation in construction going forward? So that's another question I think that it'd be, and I might, Representative Larson may have as good idea on this as anybody. Are we going to expect a little deflation going forward? Because we need to understand that as we decide what projects we put out there too, because maybe the cost will be affected.
Representative Summers, we actually, in going through, we just redid all of our calculations for when we're projecting projects. In doing so, we met with the Economic Analysis Division of ANI. We used their resources to kind of take a look at what kind of a percentage, like we include, if we're going to bid a project, we're bidding it out like a couple years out where we're going to actually have those costs. We have an inflationary factor that we include in those costs so that we can make sure that we're covering them. In meeting with them, it has historically run around 4%. In our latest meeting with them, they recommended that we bring that down to 0 because they don't feel like there's going to be a cost. They looked at the historical data, and the last kind of recession downturn time that we had was back in like 2008, and it took a little bit of a downturn in the cost, and it took approximately, I believe he told me, 3 years before we saw those costs go back up. Does that answer your question?
I would add to that.
Mr. Finney, and then I'll get to you, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, just to add to that, if you guys take a look at page 434, the time frame between 2009 and 2012 is what the economics professionals indicated that we're going to go through again. So when you look at the little X's, that's the bid plotteds, and you see through 2009 and 12s, people sharpened their pencils. Things got pretty tight, and the deviations within bids were very consistent. We're getting the best bang for our buck on those dollars going out. And then after that, the market took off again. So we're probably going to, when we had our meeting, we're going to go through that period where things are going to get tight. Numbers are going to be good. If we're going to put anything on the street, probably now is the time to get it out there. So take advantage of the opportunity, I guess, and this aspect.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Laura, I don't know if this question may be to you. It may be to Mel if he's still around. I was really intrigued by this chart on the means showing us being lower than the national average and frankly lower than most of the regional average. And the reason I say that is when we worked on getting the projects ready at the state hospital and the Life Resource Center, we were told that due to material costs having to come from other states, the freight, the workforce availability, that all of that was putting pressure on Wyoming to be more costly than our neighboring states. And Mel, am I recalling that incorrectly?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, no, sir, you absolutely are hearing the same thing I heard back then. So I would tell you, I'm a little torn with this conversation, to both sides. I understand what economic analysis says, but I tend to agree with you, Representative Larson, that based on what we've seen, and as you know, what we've seen on the Life Resource Center and the state hospital, we have seen some inflation, some cost inflated by the contractors when you look at not just time, but material costs. And we have seen some increasing costs based on material schedules and material price increases over the past, let's say, 6 months. And an example of that is, and Billy and I were having that conversation today, we had a contractor who were, I think the one that was working cabinets or something, and he had a price, he automatically had a price increase for the end of the year, which was substantial. And they expect us to pay the difference for that because of the cost increase that was not part of the original cost, but was cost based on an increase that happened before the materials were delivered. So I think you're right, Representative Larson. There is a sense that there are some cost increases that are happening in the projects. We just, looking at the the magic wand here. We really don't know exactly how that's going to fall out. And I would tell you, and I've said this before, I think that there is a regional effect to cost increase too around the state. All contractors are not the same. All contractors don't bid in the same areas the same. We've seen that in state construction, at least on the CM side of the house. We've seen it. I'm not sure on the schools, because the schools are sort of a fixed unit in how schools are built and all the requirements for them. But on some of the other projects we have, we've seen increases in projects over the last 6 months or a year or so.
So follow up, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up. I see you, Senator Rothfuss, and I'll get to you in a second.
So, but I guess where I'm confused is as we look at this, and as I heard what Brandon said and what Laura said, it would indicate that the cost of doing construction in Wyoming is less than what our other states are in the region, and certainly less than what it is nationally. And we're not seeing that. So are we seeing that actually is true? Is that, are the state hospital and life resource an anomaly in this? And if, because we based all of those bids on the fact that we had the possibility of professional services and where supplies are located, the supply chain, the per diem, all of those things that come into the calculation. This report would tell me that to build schools, which is really no different than what we're doing Life Resource Center in the state hospital, are cheaper. And so then what's making it cheaper? Is it the labor that's cheaper, or is it indeed cheaper? Because we kind of need to know that if we're going to make decisions on doing any new building. I'm getting mixed signals, and maybe I shouldn't be. I don't know.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and I'll defer this to Laura and Finney. For me, I think the question is, and I think to your point about schools, when we're looking at the RS mean number versus the number for what the actual construction cost is, and I guess let me ask that question to Laura and Finney. What's the difference in percentage of the difference between RS mean and the true cost of construction per square foot on the school side?
I don't have the information on the states, but I can tell you what this RS means. As I explained earlier, you have to put in specific parameters. So these costs are specifically related to an elementary school building, a middle school building, and a high school building, with specific configurations that we put in there. I mean, not all of those buildings are built with just a face brick, with concrete block, with bearing walls. And you have to apologize, I'm not a construction person, but all of the different aspects that you put into a building contribute to the cost that you have. And so in order to make a comparison, the only way to really do that is say, okay, if we did the exact same thing in every state, what would the cost be? And they do that based on kind of an average cost. And RS means updates itself quarterly. So it's not like a continuous updating. We waited to pull the data for this report until we pulled it from April. I think the end of April, I pulled the data, or I had someone pull the data. So we were trying to give you the most current information that we have, but you're also going to see, as the economy and the COVID situation happens, I think you're going to see a change in construction costs regardless. But that's why you see a difference in the general fund, on the general fund side, as opposed to the side of the house that's on the school side, because those numbers were pulled specifically designed for school buildings, if that answers your question. And the other thing that you're not seeing in that report, one of the other things that we look at when we're doing our back end projections, is there's a statute that requires us to take into consideration regional differences. So when we're calculating, using our estimator to calculate what we think the costs are going to be, we take a global average for the state for all those school buildings by type, and then we take a look at it by region and normalize it. How far off the average are they? So if the average is $10, and let's say in the southeast region it's $12, then we give them a little bit of a bump to try and cover that because their costs are more. But in a region where it's maybe $8, we don't necessarily discredit them for that. We go ahead and give them the average. So there's all kinds of differences, because we do have two regions in the state that have higher regional costs.
Representative Larson, does that help? Senator Rothfuss, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this has been a concern, obviously, and everyone who's been on this committee for a while knows this has been a concern, that we seem to pay more for schools than they do along the Front Range, for example, and we've never really gotten to the bottom of it. We've always kind of explained some of it away, but we don't ever seem to get the breaks that it seems like we should at any given time. But I do recall that when we started working on the Laramie High School, we actually refused. Senator Nicholas and I recommended refusing the first round of bids, delayed the project by 6 months because they were all high, and we had expedited a schedule. The schedule was aggressive, that led to higher bids. And in refusing the first round of bids and going back and basically allowing a more flexible timeline, we saved several $1 million. I'd actually ask Brandon if he remembers how much we saved on that, what it came in at versus what the original bids. Do you remember, Brandon?
I don't, Senator Office, but we can pull it up. So give me a few minutes.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, the question then, Laura and others, is there anything that we're doing in our bidding process that is leading, by expediting the timeline or by over-constraining, that is leading to potentially higher bids than we would otherwise get if we had more flexibility on the timeline? Because I definitely feel like we saw that in Laramie. That's my first question. And my second, which we can get to afterwards, and I think we're getting to a little bit later, is I really would like an explanation of $450 per square foot for the Schiffer School. That would then be the second most expensive on a per square foot basis we've ever built, and just seems very high. So those are my two curiosities.
Brandon, we'll discuss the Schiffer School when we get to it. So maybe just answer the first part of that question from Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, proceed. I've got to get into a system to find the cost here.
Yeah, we can wait on that too, Mr. Chairman.
Sounds good. Any other questions on this first report that the School Facilities State Construction is presenting to us regarding how they calculate the square footage costs and estimates to see if they're in line with bids that come in? Any further questions on that report? Okay, not seeing no hands. We'll move on to our second report in the packet. I believe this starts on page 5 of 34. And I'm not sure, Mr. Finney, are you leading this off or?
Well, Mr. Chairman, what I'm going to do is hand this over to Mr. Severson, and I'm going to go back and look up the cost when the initial bid came in and then where it settled at when the actual contract was awarded. So I'll turn it over to Severson and I'll be back.
Thank you. Mr. Severson, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we have here today in your packet, pages 5 through 9, is a version of the deployment schedule that we have presented to you multiple times in the past. We've added a few changes to what we've given to you in the past to give a little more specific information on individual projects. And in particular, we have added a new sheet to this. I'm gonna present this a little bit in reverse to the way that it's in your packet, so that it can help you understand just exactly how it's built. If you go to page 7 of 34, on that particular sheet, you will see that we've got colored codes. And as you look down the sheet, it's got the individual school districts listed off to the left-hand side. It's got our project manager and our project number, and it gives a brief description of the project. So as you look at this chart, the very first colored column that you see is the funding year 2020. So it's the funding year that we're just ending this month. So it shows the current deployment that is going on. So you can pick out any individual particular project that you're interested in, and you can take a look and see what the current anticipated deployment is on each one of those. So as you move forward by funding years, so if you look at the top of the chart, you'll see that there's a funding year 2020, then 21, and then 22. And so what we've done with our project managers is we've identified the anticipated rate at which these projects will be deploying their funds. So then if you look up at the very top of the chart, there's a key. And that key is associated with the different phases, as statute calls it, the funding comes in. And you'll see that there's planning, there's land, there's design, there's construction. And as we track our funds through the projects, we basically keep these funds segregated. We're obligated to by statute to keep them segregated. We do have a provision in statute that we can, with consultation with the governor, move up to 15% between phases. But that is a process that does involve the governor's office to do that. So otherwise, the funds stay essentially assigned to the original intent that they were, unless we work with the governor to change those. So the page that you're looking at right now, page 7 of 34, those are the largest of our capital projects that are going forward right now, and it shows the deployment rate. If you look down at the very bottom of that sheet, you will see that it shows security, and as you can see, security is essentially marching along, and we anticipate that to continue expenditure of security to be continuing on past the dates that are shown on this chart. Now, one piece that is not shown on this chart is our major maintenance. And as we looked at the budgets, one of the things that we're aware of, that in very real terms, the amounts of funds that we are deploying by major maintenance is greater than the funds that we are doing in direct CapCon that this chart is specifically looking to. If we move to the next page, page 8 of 34, this is following the same format of what you looked at in the previous chart, but this is for the deployment of the current funds that have been appropriated, but not deployment has not begun. So if you take a look at the first column, funding year 2020, you'll see there's no expenditures because the authorization on these funds does not begin until the first quarter of 21, which is July 1st of this year. So those funds will begin to be deployed. This is our project managers' work in determining what the anticipated rate will be and speed at which these projects will be deployed. If you move then to the last sheet, which is page 9 of 34 of this presentation, this chart is representing the expenditure by quarter anticipated for the funds that are available to us. And on this chart, you will see the blue is the funds that currently are in the accounts available to be expended by the department. The green represents the new funds that will be available as of July 1st. So as you track through the funding years, and then we've got calendar dates down below them, it kind of shows the anticipated rate. The idea is typically when you move into the next biennial funding year, replenishment of that fund would again echo this going forward for future projects as well. Now I turn your attention back to sheet page 6 now, and what we've put together is we've been asked multiple times for a little more clarity specifically on projects, what's going on, what phase they're in, what particular work is going on. So the information that you're seeing on this page essentially reflects what you looked at the two charts that followed this, and it identifies Again, the district, our capital project number, and then the funding year. So you can take a look and see what years the fundings on some of these projects were provided. Gives a bit of a project description, and then the type of funding that is being deployed. For example, if we go to the very top of the chart, we take a look at Albany 1, purchase of land for a future school. That's a land project. The original appropriation was $750,000. And then it identifies in the next column the amount of that original appropriation that still remains unspent. So those dollars, for example, on the first one, the $750,000 still remains. And then in our notes, then we provide where that project is. And we've worked with the district and identified the need for that land has not quite benchmarked yet, but they are proceeding. They have identified a parcel of land, and they anticipate completing that purchase by the end of the year. So you can walk through each one of these, look at any particular district, any particular project, and track through where it currently is. And again, we've got a little bit of a verbal description of where that project is. Now, some of the pieces that you will take a look at here, for example, if you go to the second one on the list, the Albany 1, which is the Slade Elementary, you'll see that if you go down below in the second part of this sheet, there's the funding that is coming up from the previous legislative session that is going to be activated as of July 1st. And you'll see that Albany 1 Slade is on that list too as the second item. The first one, if you take a look, the type of funding is design. So originally there was an appropriation of $2.28 million for design. Still remaining unspent in that is $1.2 million. And those dollars are currently being expended preparing the design for this next phase for the new funds that will be made available July 1st for that school down below. So between these two pieces of this chart, the deployment up high and the new funds down below, in some cases there is connection between the two of those. And then some of them are just independent. But selectively, we've been asked multiple times in these meetings, well, where is X project? I'm curious to know where that is. And these are the projects that we've gotten the most questions. Our administration made the decision that these were the ones that we would provide a little more clarity. At any time, we can also do this, as needed on a basis if additional information is required. And so everything at the bottom of the sheet, all of those deployments start July 1st. In most cases, if you take a look at the descriptions, you'll see that most of those, the procurement of the professionals are in progress. In the case of construction, most of those won't proceed until the design is completed. So we've just given enough of an understanding for you to see how we're proceeding on those projects right now. Mr. Chairman, if there's any particular projects or any particular items that you'd like to review, I'd be happy to go over those with you. In particular, you will see the fourth from the bottom, the John Schiffer project is listed on there, and that one did come up in discussions earlier.
Senator Office, you want to ask your question now about the Schiffer School, and then I may have a question on that same school as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we have them. Don't we have more detail about them coming a little bit later, or am I wrong? I thought there was something in a later presentation. No?
No, Mr. Chairman, I do have the answers though to Senator Office's question.
Excellent. Let's do that.
Okay. So question number one is on the high school, Laramie High School. We'll look at that. So February 27, 2014, the project was bid. It came in at $333.67. The bid was rejected, as the senator spoke about. It was rebid on November 21st, 2014, and it came in at $307.34. That is a decrease of $26.33. So once, just to add into that, a couple more things. In 2014, we put 17 capital construction projects on the street. In that year, I've been around for 11 years. That year, we rejected 5 of the 17 bids. We just said, this is ridiculous. We got to get the cost under control. I believe that would probably be depicted in some of that graphs that we were looking at back a minute ago. You can see that in looking on page 434, that's where the bids were plotted, and they were just all over the board. So the contractors were, providing a number, and it was getting a little bit excessive. So that year we rejected 5 of the bids. We were able to save $26.33 on DeLaramie High School. A couple of caveats to that, I would echo Senator Rothfuss's comments. One is time. You can't crunch, you can't put a $20, $30, $40 million job out to bid and ask for a number in 4 weeks. Prior to my life here, I was doing just that, and it takes a lot of effort and massive teams to put together a bid on a multi-million-dollar project. So time, and also the deliverable time. These buildings take 18 plus months. Everybody thinks that, heck, we'll whip out an elementary school and we'll design it in 8 months and we'll build it in a year. But in reality, it just takes more time and effort. And as a result, you'll end up paying for that type of speed, right? The second question was regarding to John C. Schiffer. That project was also rejected. I wasn't able to have enough time to get the initial cost. The district did bid it. The first time, bids were astronomical. They said, once again, this is excessive cost. The district, as well as the department, worked together, rejected that bid. Also took it back through value engineering process again to try to whittle down the numbers, look at the components, the systems that were being put into the facility. They also decreased the square footage of the facility, and to a point where they still could deliver the program, but where could they trim any of the excess square footage? Another couple items I wrote down was location, competition. There was 4 bidders that bid on that. So obviously more competition, the sharper the pencil will get. Economy of scale. That particular project is a smaller project. I have recorded the footprint is 21,000, double check and verify here. Yep, 21,000 square foot and a little bit over. 21, so that is a lot smaller footprint. And obviously when you get into the bigger project, economy of scale gets kicked in, and you can reduce some costs as well. So does that answer your question, Senator Rothfuss?
Senator Rothfuss, I'll let you follow up.
Yeah.
Senator Landon, I see you there, but I'm going with the follow-up first.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Brandon, it answers most of my questions. The one I have, though, is the number that we see here at the $450-ish per square foot. Is that the accurate final number for the Schiffer school after a bid rejection? And then that's what it came in at, with 4 different bidders coming in with a lower approach?
Yes, sir. I have it on July 12, 2019, 458.20.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Brandon, really appreciate it. You touched on a couple of things that partially answered what I thought was a really good question from the senator from Albany County, and that is, what in our processes, if anything, can we do to help in the bid process? And I'm sure you're always looking at that. It sounds like you are. Is the biggest driver that time element? Are we expecting things to be done so quickly that we're driving that cost up? Given the period of time that we're in right now, Brandon, everything's important, and just wondering if you have any thoughts about what we could or should do, if anything.
Mr. Chairman, I'll let the director go. He has his hand up.
Mr. Muldrow?
Mr. Chairman, and to Senator Landon, I will hand that off to Brandon here in a second, but let me make a comment. And I think this goes back to the question that I believe Senator Rothfuss and Representative Larson had. I think one of our biggest deterrents, and I know we've had this conversation last session, is that we advertise our projects and we put the dollar amount of what we think the project costs. And I think we have to find out a way, and I say we as SCD and the legislature, as we're providing those packages for review through the SBC for us to School Facility Commission and select, and then to the legislature to look at, we really need to do what we were talking about before. Bundle those projects, just like we did the level 1 and 2s this year for CapCon. We didn't advertise them. We put them, we let the folks see who needed to see what the cost was. Bundle that level 1 and 2 into a bundle package and say, here, with the understanding we got 10 projects, we know that, but within that level 1 and 2, we said we need $20 million to do level 1 and 2 as an example. I think we need to do the same thing with CapCon. I think every time we advertise that, oh, we're going to build a school and it's $27 million, well, you're going to get a $27 million bid because the contractor is going to already know that that's the cost. Now, how do I either get to that cost or how do I fall within the range of that cost? And it's the same thing when you look at the major CapCon buildings. When we looked at Casper office building, we had some of the same issues, but we had to do some rejections on that to say, look, no, that's not going to work. Let's put it back on the street. And so, so I think that's key. If we can find a way to, without taking away from the public's ability to understand what the state's doing, how can we do that where we can just bundle that dollar amount and say we've got $300 million in capital construction, and it could be 10 projects, but we don't have to say what each of the project estimated cost is. I think that by itself would be astronomical in helping us control the cost of construction. Now with that, I'll let Brandon talk about the thing with the schedule for schools and openings and all that. So
before you hand it off to Brandon, I see Senator Rothfuss has a question that I think will be headed your direction.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to follow up on what Mel was saying as far as the cost constraints. I mean, we've got some problems built into the system that we've talked about for quite a while that really doesn't encourage cost constraint. And one of those really is we simultaneously constrain the price or announce the price. So as Mel was saying, everyone's going to go right to that price. But then we also constrain what you're going to get for that price because the district can't get more square footage than they're allocated. So there's really no incentive for the district a lot of the time to try and find cost savings either, since they're given a very specific, this is the package you get. It's been approved. And if you look for cost savings, you don't gain anything from those cost savings. So when the district is doing all of their detailed analysis, it's not like they get more square footage if that price goes from $300 per square foot to $250 a square foot. The district doesn't see anything. The state saves money. So another thing that maybe and we've talked about it for years, we just haven't found a way to do it, is trying to align the district's objectives with the state objectives, where saving money is of benefit to the state as well. And then, as Brandon's answering a variety of questions, one more I'd tack on as we hand off to him is, I wonder if any other state has done something where you flipped it a little bit and you basically say, look, we're going to pay $300 per square foot to build schools, period, or $275 or $250 or whatever that number is per square foot. It's going to be to rigorous standards and let a contract that way. Who wants to be building for the state of Wyoming? And who wants to build, 100,000 square foot of school or 200,000 square foot of school for Wyoming, where we're not opening it to, you tell us how much you want us to pay and we'll pay it. We're saying this is how much we'll pay. Who wants to be involved? I don't know if any state has a model like that. So I'm just curious to know whether that's an alternative that could be pursued.
Mr. Muldrow.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, good point there. One of the things I've seen over the years working in construction, when I was in the military, when I was working in healthcare, when we had federally mandated projects, a lot of their projects come out and they do just what you're saying. They come out and say, here's the cost that we've come up with, and this is what the standard armory is going to cost. And that's pretty much what you're going to spend to go out and build a building. And if you can't meet the requirements of that, you don't get the contract right off the bat. If I could just make one other comment, I think the other piece is, and I'll ask staff to talk about it. You know, we as a state, at least what I've noticed, is we drop a lot of projects out at the same time. And even though we plan projects, we go through the planning process. If you look at how we drop the projects out, you know, if you're doing school projects, you have, let's say you have 7 schools that the districts want to push out this year. We're dropping 7 schools to the legislature to look at and make a decision on. On the CapCon side, we're doing the same thing. When you look at community colleges, in their mind, they're mandated to do submit projects every year, and they do. And then we go and we fund those projects to a point when we have the money to fund it. We're dropping a lot of projects within the state sometimes at the same time, be it either level 1, 2, or level 3 projects going out to be built and designed. Maybe we need to have a conversation about how we not narrow that down, but slow down how we push projects out. You know, we had a conversation, I think, some years ago, if you might remember. You know, we all know that in a non-budget year, we're not necessarily looking for CapCon projects in a non-budget year, but periodically they happen. And so if we get to a cycle where, let's say, we're only pushing projects every 2 years out in the major capital budget season, we surely can work through that. And so maybe we need to find a way to strategically, more strategically, be able to control how many projects we're going to actually let out in consistent years, so that we're not seeing these lulls. We're putting out 15 or 20 big projects, and then we don't have any for 4 or 5 years. Contractors get all excited because we're not creating enough work for them, and then we end up with a lull where we don't do any. So like school side now, we're not doing a lot of school buildings right now, but for a while there, we were dropping out, I don't know how many a year. We were pushing a lot of projects out at one time. Just a thought, something to be thinking about, I think. So.
Senator Bebout.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a couple of comments about what Senator Rothfuss and Mel are talking about. And I know Representative Larson is in the same boat, and this is how I make a part of my living, is bidding on jobs. And clearly when you have the engineer's estimate or the architect's estimate, that drives a lot about what happens. There's no question about it. And so the one question I have is the CMAR versus the design, bid, and build. I've always felt that a design, bid, and build was ultimately the better way to do it. So do we have any information that shows which way we go? And then a question for Paul. On the list, you know, we've got about $87 million, and your short list is about $25 million. And these projects are all good projects. They were vetted properly during the last legislative session. Are they all in a go, no-go mode? I mean, we've got some serious issues. And if you were to look at this from a broad perspective of what if we were decided to spend this money somewhere else, if we needed to, whatever, are we already in a go mode for all the 87 million, or half of them a go mode? What's the status of that in terms? I know a lot of them are being designed. And maybe you could provide some insight on that. And maybe that's a question we should have an answer to later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I don't mean to jump in front of Brandon if he has additional comments to the director. But I would, before I forget, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to suggest that we may want to consider perhaps a message from you as the chairman going forward. And we've got some further meetings and some more time to think about this, but we may want to suggest some changes in approach to our colleagues on the Appropriations Committee, and much of how they react to what we might suggest to them obviously is going to be up to that committee. But for example, I really like when the director says, maybe what we do is we suggest that we think these 5 projects are worthy of moving forward with. There are a couple of others in the hopper and then the Appropriations Committee takes it, much as we did on the projects last year, and simply approves the projects. The bids go out, and we don't announce those figures before we get a bid. So I didn't want to forget that, Mr. Chairman, but it's an option that I think I really favor. I think any directives or requests that we can give to our Appropriations Committee might be helpful.
Representative Freeman, sorry I missed you a minute ago.
You're good. You're good. I like the suggestion that we spread out the bids over a long period of time. We all get the interchange magazine from the Highway Department. And that's one of the first things that I noticed is that they're putting out bids for the entire year, which I think helps the construction agency. How do they do it? And can we do something similar to that is my question.
Brandon, if you're not out of ink from all the questions that you've been asked and the notes you're taking, Mr. Severson, I'll let you aid in Brandon's responses and
then
go over to Mr. Finney.
I do have some ink burned up on this pen. I'm going to try to hit them all. Hopefully I address each of them. Let's see. So something about the funding, shifting the schedules and doing a couple notes here. Shifting the schedules obviously helps. And this is all sort of blended into one topic. As you know, the opportunity to get the appropriations comes July 1st. So what happens is we submit our annual report and it has in it the biennial budget. So that's 2-year block of funds, and we get that. And my analogy every year is everybody's lined up. All 48 districts that got money are in the horse race chutes, and when that money hits, they're all going. So, and to piggyback off that, currently I think it was in Senate File 1, it says that the commission may submit a supplemental budget request for the period beginning July 1st, 21 and ending June 30th, 22 for emergencies or unanticipated needs. So right now we have no requests coming forward. So we get big chunks of cash and we execute a lot of projects. So I think that ties into Representative Freeman spreading it out, consistent, the opportunity to go forward in maybe the supplemental or a little bit more smaller bites of revenue coming in that we get to deploy those funds. So that's one thought. And also by having thorough designs, giving longer durations to have more accuracy in the plans and specification results in less change orders, better bids. Another item that was mentioned, or any other states doing this, give them $300 a square foot. I will say I'm a member of the National Council of School Facilities, which represents directors from all over the state. We're unique. Most states don't pay for the schools like this. Everything's done at the very local level, bonding. And I think that would require very specific prescriptive design guidelines. An example would be your classroom will be X, your principal's office will be Y, you will get A, B, and C. Right now, we don't have that structure. It's a little more, you get a allotment of square footage. You must provide a capacity of 350 kids and provide this program with these specifications in their design. So that would take an overhaul, and it's a big paradigm shift. We'd have to, we would literally demand a real structive, a prescriptive type performance specification. Senator Bebout, CMAR versus design bid build. I'm not analyzing this. I think it depends on the scenario. If you're doing a massive complex renovation that's occupied, perhaps a CMAR may be the way to go. But if you got a green field over here and it's 20 acres on the edge of town, you're doing an elementary school, I would just design bid build it, keep the numbers and provide the competition. As far as, I think you also mentioned, Mr. Bebout, on go or no go. Currently, all those projects that were appropriated, we're getting together our project agreements with those school districts. For an example, Slade, That one's already, they're working on the redesign of it and tuning up the code compliance and the plans and specs, and it's planned on getting out on the street as soon as possible. So we're not letting dust settle around when we're told to execute a task, and we're making it happen. So, Mr. Chairman, hopefully that went through all my ink.
Any further questions? Mr. Severson, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. My experience with schools has included several of our adjacent states. I've been a project architect on schools in South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Colorado. And Mr. Finney was correct in the fact that the funding is coming from a very localized source in all of those states. It's the one rare exception that I had experience with was the BEST program in Colorado. But those funds were distributed based on merit, not need. And so school districts competed for available funds in that case, and not necessarily the most needy were the ones who were awarded. They were awarded based on the merits of the submission that they gave. And in their case, their funding had accumulated for multiple years, and I believe they've pretty well expended the funds they had available, and they don't have a continuing source to keep going with that program. So that's one of the unique situations, but Oregon and Hawaii are the only other two states that are providing funding for schools, and Hawaii is one school district. So it's essentially the one school district is providing the funds for those projects. Mr. Chairman, in response to Senator Beavout's question, on the list that we're looking at, if you look back at page 6, Slade Elementary was a project that we'd identified that the design was existing up above, and now this last session funding for the construction. There is one more project on that list under Natrona 1, the Pine View Elementary School. The design for that project was completed in 2015, but construction appropriations were not appropriated for that project. So there is a design basically on the shelf for that one project. Otherwise, we've been very diligent about doing design and following with construction. So there are no other projects in particular that are waiting on the shelf to be done. But the Pine View project does have complete design.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Paul, I really appreciate that. And to you and Brandon both, I guess my question would be, I just like the rest of you, I've been talking to a lot of constituents out on the street these past few weeks, and how quickly can we put our construction teams to work? Brandon, you alluded to that a little bit with the Slade School, for example. I have in the back of my mind, I think we're still designing up at 10 Sleep. I think we're probably stuck in a design phase at an auditorium over in Fremont County. In my mind is when can we help to put some of our construction teams to work on some of these projects?
Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Landon, in order to expedite getting people to work, the best avenue is probably the component funding cycle or process, those projects. Last year, I believe we submitted $39 million of component funding request, and of that, the legislature appropriated $10 million. The reason why I earmark those projects is they're usually smaller. They're more at the local level, and they're done with the community within the projects being done. The barriers to entry is smaller, they're faster, versus a Slade or these massive projects. You know, just design time alone can be in excess of a year. So that's the first avenue I would like to say.
Okay, thank you. Just as a follow-up, Brandon.
Follow-up.
These schools that we have vetted and finally brought forward to try to clean up some lists from the past. a year or two ago, and they have reached the point where we can finally cut the ribbon and get going. We're still a ways out on those, aren't we? We're looking at how many months before we can have somebody on a work site?
Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Landon. So on the Slade one, they're going to be putting that one out this summer pretty quick because it was already designed shelf just sitting there. They're currently heading to bidding documents, getting everything ready to go out. So that one will be pretty quick, and hopefully we can get some favorable numbers. On the 10 Sleep one, we got to kick that off and start from scratch. So some of these are further along in their life cycle than others. The auditoriums, the stuff up in the Fremonts, we got to start from scratch. We got to go out and do the procurement process, hire the professionals, do the design, the engineering, and then go out on the street.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brandon. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Senator Bebout, and then I'll get to Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I listen to what Brandon's saying, and the speaker and I have been on several Zooms the last couple of days as well. And one of the things that I really appreciate is getting after the components. But the other way to put people back to work, and what Senator Land is talking about, which is really important, is to look at the maintenance side of it. And I know they have in-house with the school districts their own funds to do it. I know we set aside some. Is there anything this committee might be able to do, or you could do to maybe kick that major maintenance into gear a little bit more? And it'll help the local people. That's who do most of the work rather than the big projects. And of course, the schools need it. That's why we do it. Is there anything you could do or we could do to help enhance that?
Mr. Severson or Mr. Finney?
Mr. Chairman, we have used a process in the past where the commission has all of the deficiencies identified in school systems, and we have in the past funded specific condition-related projects, and those could be deployed quite quickly. But in some cases, though, we did experience where some school districts they didn't care for that process because it didn't meet their priorities. So we had some success with that, and the speed of that would be quick, but it would be up to the districts as to whether or not they would be interested in funding of that kind. That would be essentially identified by the commission and awarded to individual districts.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just
go ahead, Brandon.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Mr. Chairman, just to add into that, so Senator Bebout, I think existing funds that the district have, we can't go in and tell them you'll spend X dollars and execute a certain component. But as Severson was talking about, the commission directed component project worked really well. And the best example is probably the Sheridan 2 Sagebrush project. It went in there and completely took care of all the deferred maintenance, and they'll probably extend that building for another 20, 30 years. So if we worked at it, if you guys are looking at providing funds, we could strategically implement a model that we did. And we did that in 2017 when we were transitioning from the asset preservation. And we did all the studies for that. And that project went really well. And we did several of them like that. But as Paul mentioned, though, the district has to be on board because they may not be on the same track as that plan.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And mine's just kind of a follow-up to what Senator Landon was talking about. I had two contractors who I would probably consider mid-range, whatever that means, say that they have a hard time bidding on contracts because they're not big enough for the bonding and other things. And I don't know what I'm talking about, but that's what they told me. And they were looking for smaller projects to where that they can get into taking state contracts, school contracts, and that kind of stuff. Is the component method the best way to get those contractors involved in our school maintenance and building?
Go ahead, Mr. Finn.
Mr. Chairman, through Representative Freeman, a couple of things. On the last year we did, I can't remember if it's House Bill 50, 51, or 52, but Those bills did just that. And what it did was it increased the bonding limit to $150,000. And the intent behind that was to engage the local contractors on some of these projects. Some of the components are small enough that they would be able to go after and get that work. I will also throw out there that, so that was a great bill, and it did just that, help improve the efficiencies, put local people to work, raise the barriers to entry for those smaller contractors. The other thing is that school districts are currently going to the quarterly major maintenance payment. So some of them are, well, they're looking at their cash balance, their liabilities that's coming on the books, and they're sort of in the reserve mode. They're going to hunker down a little bit, not be spending so much major maintenance because now it's coming quarterly. So they may have to save up a little bit until that revenue is coming in and they have enough balance to then get their cycle back on track.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Paul, maybe at some point you could send me some information on how Hawaii, since they're one district, how they decide to build schools in different areas of the state. In other words, do they have a lot of local control, so to speak, in how schools are built, or how do they design their school buildings, and are there a lot of differences place to place? So just give me that information sometime.
Go ahead, Mr. Severson.
Mr. Chairman, we can forward that information to the committee for distribution. We follow the statutory process for making our recommendations to both the commission and to the select committee, and we have it quite regimented, although we're in the process of reevaluating that as we're required to statutorily. But we do have a process that creates the priorities, and we can provide that information.
Senator Landon, you had a question.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll save it for the end of the day. I think there's just some suggestions that we may want to carry forward. I was thinking out loud with myself as to whether or not this committee would have any ability to expedite something for the end of June, for example. And I don't think we do, but I really like where Senator Bebout was going with maybe some opportunities to put some people to work. And I don't think that's going to work, but I was thinking out loud with all of you to share that if we could put something together that we could take to the end of June, and Brandon and Paul, for example, Mel, maybe they have a list that we could free up a couple more projects, but we're under a really tight time frame, Mr. Chairman, so thank you.
Mr. Finney, go ahead.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, we could get you a list and probably email that over to LSO of potential projects, if that's what you would desire.
Mr. Chairman, I'll think about that, and then maybe at the end of the day we can visit for a little bit longer on that.
Okay.
Senator Landon, you'll make a note of that to visit at the end of the day. I'm going to shift gears a little bit on the John C. Schiffer School. And when it was first proposed, it was going to be a school for Johnson County, Buffalo students, Sheridan, all of the Sheridan County districts. And now it seems that it's going to be just for Sheridan proper. And we received an email in that regard a few weeks back. And so just a little more discussion on how that changed and why all of that came about is that, in my mind, that somewhat changes my desire for the project a little bit when it's not as inclusive as it started out to be.
Mr. Chairman, I'll take that one. So working through the planning process, we did work with, I believe it was Buffalo, which is Johnson. They indicated at the beginning when we were sizing the facility, we had these discussions that they may send up to approximately 10 people. I do know Sheridan 1 also has a small alternative school and may also include that. I believe I was following some emails also that Johnson has now shifted direction. I think they went through some school board member changes, new superintendent, and the track course has deviated a little bit from the original conception. So we've moved forward with just the Sheridan 2 facility.
So in that case, does the Sheridan 2 facility then need to be downsized because it was upsized to take advantage for those other students coming in from those other districts? Like you said, the 10 students from Buffalo, which is what I recall, the couple students from Sheridan 2 or Sheridan 1, however it worked out, coming in. And so I don't know what the Sheridan proper district's growth rate is looking like for students, but does there need to be a change in size as the number of students that were originally expected is now changing as the whole vision is changing?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the change was not due to the reduction in students, but as we were just talking a minute ago about construction cost, when they bid it and it came in significantly over budget, they cut about $2 million out of the project. And as a result, one of the things they did was take out square footage. So it organically happened, but not through that mechanism.
So following up on that, are we going to see Johnson County requesting their own for another $20 million? Because I'd rather spend $2 million or $3 million to upsize Sheridan's and share the facility than build a second one 35 miles away for $20 million. If you see where I'm going with that thought process. So
most definitely.
Expand.
So, Mr. Chairman, I do know that I believe we have gotten some requests and inquiries about the process. They have to go through WDE first. There's a couple of barriers to entry in even becoming a registered alternative school. So they're currently working through some of those processes. But right now, we haven't gotten any requests to do their own. As a matter of fact, through some of the discussions I was involved in, they would just look at using some of their existing facilities. So a portion of another building. So no new capital. And they were going to improve the building, get some of the major maintenance, some of the components that needed improved through major maintenance funding, and then just utilize it.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Senator Bebout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Help me out on that, on the John Schiffer School. Was there not some local money given to help with that school, or am I thinking of the college?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bebout, that's all state CapCon money. I don't think they've got any enhancements on it. Maybe a small road that's adjacent on it'd be the east side, I believe, but there's not a lot of, it's per the plans and specs and the state standards. They didn't deviate much at all. And Paul could probably add into that.
Mr. Chairman, there were no enhancements added to that project. That is 100% state funded, and all of the features of the project have been included. So at this point, I would not anticipate there's been no discussion about the school district seeking an enhancement on that project.
Senator Bebout, follow up. What I do recall your thoughts with the college is there is somewhat of a partnership. I think they're sharing some of the cafeteria space and some things like that, if I remember going back a few years. So there's the square footage for the educational component is all state funded, but there is somewhat of a co-partnership usage of other spaces that will be part of the project, if I remember correctly. Mr. Severson?
Mr. Chairman, that's the current situation.
Okay.
They are using college facilities right now, but when the new facility is complete, the alternative school will be self-contained, although they have talked about using some library, and then there will be some students potentially going and taking community college classes, so they will technically be going to the community college and getting credit for both their high school level and college level courses.
Okay, that's the partnership. Thank you. Senator Bebout, follow up on that, or are you content?
Well, I'm never sure about being content, Mr. Chairman. So getting back to your point, and I realized we were utilizing the college facilities, and and with the demand and everything, you know, it's a go. You hate to stop anything like this from moving forward, but I guess the question I would have is, if you started out today, given what's going on and the use of the college facilities, do we need to do this or not? And that's a tough question. I'm not sure anyone can answer that. So that's the only comment I would have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Severson, follow up.
One other thing that I will add, if you go back to that page 6 on the deployment schedule, foundation started in April. They're pretty much complete. So in very real terms, this project is fully underway. The concept of any modifications to the project are at this point not very realistic.
Okay, thank you. Anything further on the project schedules and deployments and what's ongoing and things like that, committee? I'm looking for hands and not seeing any. It's noon, so I think we'll take a 30-minute lunch break and pick up with report number 3 from school facilities at 12:30, if that's okay with the committee. If I see a bunch of thumbs down, I won't Senator Bebout.
No, just thank you, Mr. Chairman, for shortening the schedule down. But that's fine. I can work with that.
We can do an hour if you need an hour.
No. I was trying to add a little comedy, but forget it.
All right, 30 minutes. So we'll be back at 12:30, committee.